lecture for July 5th, 2026. We are still celebrating America's 250th birthday, and we have been celebrating it with daily live streams going back since. When did we start? We've been going since June 26th. Usually we only do Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays here, but we decided to do live streams for every day of a week. And that led us all the way through to this weekend where we had our 2 hour special where Uncle Sam visited you guys yesterday. And now I'm back, Friendly History, here to give a live stream lecture about the America's founding. We're going to talk about the Declaration of Independence, the American Revolutionary Movement, all sorts of incredible things. Now, this is a live stream lecture, so I won't be interacting with the chat as much. And because we're still celebrating America's 250th birthday, we will be discussing the founding of America, a topic I've done before as a live stream lecture, but one that's really interesting and one that I hope you will enjoy. So please double tap the screen, like and subscribe, become a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as all of that. Check out all the long, short, and live form content available for you 24/7, 365, or 366 days a year. And yeah, if you like social studies, social sciences, and history, this is the place for you. And we're really glad to have you here. And thank you for choosing to spend part of your 4th of July weekend with us. We've had some incredible live streams about American history and all sorts of incredible stuff over the last week or so, available to you completely, as well as a series about American history videos that we've been doing every single day. We'll do one more for today. Today will conclude our celebration, and then we'll be back to regular broadcasting with our Friday, Saturday, and Sunday Q&As and live streams, and doing all sorts of different topics, not just American history, because we've been focusing a lot on it here and on TikTok. So please, again, become a friendly neighborhood historian and check out all of that content, and sit back, relax, get something cold or warm, depending on the weather. Probably cold based on all the heat stroke going on through Europe and the United States right now. And sit back as I tell you about the founding of America and the movement that led to the Declaration of Independence, with special emphasis on America's Declaration of Independence. And remember, the colonists were celebrating the independence all throughout the year because, obviously, when the Declaration was signed on July 2nd, then approved on July 4th, the vast majority of people did not know. George Washington did not know. He was too busy preparing his troops for a siege in New York that went very poorly when the British attacked them. And so it took months for people throughout the continent to find out, and in Europe. George III famously wrote in his diary on July 4th, 1776, "Nothing important happened today." And that's not because he was being snide, it's because he had no idea of knowing what was happening across the globe, because there was no telegraph, there was no telephone, there was no radio, there was no computers, there was no internet, there was nothing. News arrived from ships, and that took months for word to spread. And so really, the rest of the 13 colonies didn't know what had happened in Philadelphia. It was something that became known in the coming weeks and months. So you can still celebrate 4th of July even the day afterwards, as I'm sure many people are doing, because it's still the weekend and people are still enjoying themselves. So I hope you are enjoying yourself here at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and we're going to be doing our live stream lecture to finish our 10-day in a row live stream marathon. And we're going to finish with America's founding, a very apropos subject. So please sit back, relax. Like I said, you can grab something cold or hot to drink, maybe a snack or something, and follow us as we go through America's founding and why America became an independent nation. If I had more energy and more time, and I probably should do this for a live stream lecture in the future, I would do all of America's history in 1 hour. Anyways, America's founding really starts in a story of America's founding, a topic I've done on a live stream lecture, but of course it's a special for 4th of July weekend and everything. Stream shouldn't be glitching. Okay, the stream should not be glitching. We should be back. Okay. So, the 4th of July and the celebration of America's independence and the founding really dates back to another extremely important event that it probably deserves its own live stream lecture. I'm pretty sure I've given a live stream lecture on it before, but that is the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. And by the way, for those of you who are wondering, I went and saw the movie Young Washington last night. Great way to celebrate 4th of July after the live stream was over, and Uncle Sam told me you were all so well behaved and you had a great time. So I went and checked that out, and it was really, really good. Very jingoistic, maybe sensationalized in bits, and obviously very pro-American, very patriotic, and all of that stuff. And when you're a historian, you learn to see through this stuff and take it with a grain of salt and be very critical about some of the myths and legends that surround America's great heroes. But there is no doubt about it, after watching Young Washington, that George Washington was a formidable leader. He was an excellent man, a man of great character and virtue, and developed that even at a young and early age. When we think of George Washington and the kind of person he was, we're almost always thinking of Washington in his elder years as the leader of the American Army, the Continental Army during the American Revolution, which we'll talk about in a minute, or we think about George Washington in terms of him being president and obviously the incredible things he did in creating the American executive branch and creating the standards and expectations for a U.S. leader, for the head of state, for the United States. And of course, he did a tremendous job with this. But this movie really set up how Washington developed that character, that honesty, that integrity, that bravery that he is well known for, his self-sacrificial ways, his love for his men, his love for his country, his love for his state. George Washington was, despite having many failings, of course, one of them is the owning of slaves, as many of the founding fathers did, was a remarkable leader, a great American, and one of the greatest and most important people in all of human history. So the truth of the matter is, despite our proclivities to want to be cynical and look at the figures of history as broken and stupid and not progressive enough and not modern enough, we might very well be those stupid retrograde people in 100 years or 250 years. So I don't think that I'm ever going to accomplish what George Washington was able to accomplish in his lifetime. So Washington has accomplishments that kind of make it harder for people to criticize him for his failings. I do not have those accomplishments. So what's my defense when my failings are exposed, when my regressive ideals are brought to light, when the practices that I do in 100 years are condemned? What will I stand on? What will my legacy be? And I think that was the real key of a movie, is how you become a great person, how you develop a legacy. It's not through selfish ambition. Wanting good things and wanting status is good. It's good to want to be rich. It's good to want to be comfortable. It's good to want to live a good life. There's nothing wrong with these things. But legacy is not about that. Legacy is about what are you willing to give up, how are you willing to sacrifice, and what are you willing to do for other people. So the mic should not be echoing. I don't know why the microphone would be echoing. But really, the truth of the matter is, the movie was a really, really good depiction of what it means to build your legacy, what it means to sacrifice, and what it means to become a great person. And I think everyone should see it as a character study. If you're interested in history, it's obviously a very good film. It's not perfect. It's not 100% accurate, but it's really good. And it shows how Washington's impact in the 7 Years' War, which is going to be extraordinarily important in the American Revolution, which is a great segue into the revolutionary movement, because the American Revolution never would have happened without the 7 Years' War. So the 7 Years' War is called the 7 Years' War because it lasted 7 years. Well, that's only partially true. Like the other two world wars, and I believe firmly that the 7 Years' War is the First World War, the war does not begin in... it actually has an earlier start date than the official one. Now, many people believe World War II, or what I call World War III, starts in 1939, but there are earlier start dates presented, such as 1937, when the Japanese attack the Chinese at the Marco Polo Bridge, or the false flag operation, the Chinese attack the Japanese, and that is their excuse for the Second Sino-Japanese War, which is another leg of World War II or World War III, or whatever you want to call it. Likewise, the 7 Years' War starts in the European continent in 1756 and in India, but it doesn't start there. It starts in 1754 in the American colonies. And actually, the movie yesterday, which again I suggest you all go watch it with a skeptical eye. Don't take everything at face value. Be a critical thinker. Don't just accept narratives that are fed to you. But don't just be cynical. Don't just be like, oh, well, this is just a bunch of hogwash and pro-American nonsense. There's a lot of really good and interesting things in that movie about history, about George Washington, about the American colonies, about the British, but also about the Indians, and also about how character is developed. So look at the virtues that the movie is trying to extol rather than just the messaging, and look at the history that it's teaching you. It's very, very good. It's not perfect, but you should all go watch Young Washington. And it actually shows and exposes how involved George Washington was in the 7 Years' War and how important he was to that conflict. So in 1754, Washington was part of a regiment that fought under General not Braddock. It was he had built a fort at Fort Necessity in the Ohio River Valley. The Ohio River Valley is what is now the American Midwest. It's areas like Ohio and Indiana. And that territory was disputed by the Shawnee Indians, other groups of Native Americans, the British, and the American colonial allies. Obviously, you have the 13 colonies by now well established, and the French. The French had claimed and settled in these regions for quite some time and had been trying to dominate the Mississippi River for a long time. Something the movie doesn't do well is show how good the French were at working with the Native Americans as opposed to the British, who really struggled with it. But basically, Washington builds a fort. The fort is attacked heavily. After the attack on the fort, him and his forces are forced to retreat. It's an absolute blunder for Washington. He is embarrassed, but he actually is able to redeem himself. I forget the name of the battle, but General Samuel Braddock is attacked. Braddock is killed, and Washington is the one who rallies the American and British troops and gets them to retreat. Now, they wouldn't call themselves American. They would call themselves based off their colonial names, so it was Virginian regiments. This was the pioneer. This was the Western Territory. This was the Wild West of their day, what we now call the Middle West of the country, places like Ohio, Western Pennsylvania. And when you think of the 13 original colonies, the 13 original states, they didn't have the full completed shapes that they do nowadays. Parts of Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania, parts of New York were not, parts of the Carolinas were not, North Carolina in particular, were not fully settled. Yes, it's a live stream lecture today. So we're talking about the American founding, and we're talking about how that's going to go about. I'm giving the background, so we're talking about the 7 Years' War. So this outbreak becomes known as the French Indian War in the colonies. And in Europe, it becomes known as the 7 Years' War when it breaks out 2 years later. The Prussians ally themselves with the British to fight against the French, the Russians, and the Austrians. It's really over land in Silesia and in Germany that Frederick the Great had tried to take in from Empress Maria Theresa. Well, she's not an empress, but the Duchess of Austria, the Habsburgs, and then Tsarina Elizabeth Petrovna of Russia, and the French, Louis XV, join the conflict. The British join as a subsidiary, continuing to want to basically, whatever the French say, they're going to do the opposite. The French say white, they'll say black. And so there's also fighting going on in India because both the British and French are trying to influence and control the Rajas there. There's fighting in the African colonies. Eventually, Portugal and Spain will bring their empires into it. And by the end of the war, you really do see a world war. And world wars have world legacy impact. They have world history changing events. Obviously, both world wars in the 20th century catastrophically changed the world order that we know. And the world was very, very different afterwards. And while the 7 Years' War doesn't have the mass scale, because you don't have the Industrial Revolution, you don't have the massive number of people like you do in the 20th century in these wars, the legacy and impact is proportionally pretty impressive. It sets up and one of the most important parts of the 7 Years' War and that revolution, or that war, is that it sets up all the groundwork for the American Revolution. So by 1763, the war is over. The British have won. The French have withdrawn from the Ohio River Valley and most of Canada. The dream of a Nouveau France in America is mainly dead and was not going to really get anywhere anyways. And the British have now seized most of the Ohio River Valley territory and have declared it the land of the Indians, while they also take over larger sections of Canada. However, the British have a problem. They are broke. They have spent a lot of money and a lot of time fighting and dying for the Americans, and the Americans have spent a lot of time fighting and dying for the British, but there is an overwhelming sense of patriotism and loyalty to the British. Ever since the founding of the American colonies, the British had treated the 13 colonies as though they were from a distance. This is what's called salutary neglect. And salutary neglect basically worked this way. The British were more than willing to allow the Americans to govern themselves, create their own governments, run by their own rules, as long as they paid loyalty, fealty, and indirectly taxes to the British government. As long as the British sovereign, the King of England, of Great Britain, was the sovereign of the American colonies, there was never a problem. This is called salutary neglect, and it created a politically minded people who were independent, participatory in their government, and wanting to rule themselves. And this is something that will heavily define the foundation and creation of the United States. I made a video about this yesterday in Ben Franklin. Really, America is politically an individualistic society. It is a society where where people feel they have an active role in their government and can choose how their government works. And if their government doesn't work, they can choose another form of government. Now, this has been tried and happened many places throughout history before and after. But what makes the American experiment fascinating is this feeling of a right to be a political creature, to be in Aristotle. Thousands of years before this, had said man was a political creature. The American people believe that they are political creatures, and because of that, they have a right to participate in their government and overturn it if it does not work for them. That was very, very strikingly new in human history. Revolutions had happened before, but the American Revolution is probably the biggest inspiration of all the other major revolutions of the 19th and 20th centuries that came afterwards. So you've got the makings of a self-conscious, self-aware political populace that wants to govern itself, that wants to choose its own future and destiny. The British are fine with this, actually. But the British, as long as they pay loyalty and fealty to the British, and again, British common law, the Magna Carta, the English Civil War, the Glorious Revolution, the powers of Parliament, the English Bill of Rights, a kind of agreed upon constitution that was never really put into writing, influences the American experiment. There is no doubt that the way America creates its system is heavily impacted by the British themselves. So the problem is the British need to raise money, and so in order to raise money, they begin taxing. The first thing they tax is sugar, and then later they will start taxing stamps in 1765, and this is the one that really causes outrage. They also pass they've also passed an act called the Quartering Act, where they basically say that British soldiers need to be housed in colonial houses when they are on the continent. So if there are British soldiers present, the American colonials should be welcoming to them and allow them to stay in their homes. The taxes are not extremely heavy. They're not draconian. They are less than the British tax their own populace and their Indian colonists. But the problem with the taxes is the Americans take exception that they were not consulted on this. Now, taxes are guaranteed. Ben Franklin had said that the only two sure things in life are death and taxes. And Franklin, by the way, is living at this time in Great Britain as an envoy and representative of the American colonial colonies and their interests to the British Crown. And he's very, very loyal to the British Crown, as are most Americans. They're patriotic, they're happy, they won this war, they have more land, they have more places to explore. This is the time of Daniel Boone trailblazing through the Appalachian Trail. However, there are tensions. The British had promised the Native Americans in that region that they would basically be able to live there, and that would be their land. And the Americans don't really follow that. They don't see themselves as Americans. Again, they see themselves based on their colonials, which colony they're from. So they don't honor that, and that leads to tensions between the Indians and the Americans, which make its way back to the British, which only make the tensions that I'm about to describe much, much worse, as well as the quartering of soldiers in their homes and other problems that come later. The Americans basically believe that they should have the right to, if they are going to be taxed directly by Parliament, they need to be taxed. They need to have a say in Parliament. The local legislatures had taxed them for a century and a half, and that had been perfectly fine because they were willing to pay those taxes to the British government through those local colonial legislatures, because part of the taxes that went to those legislatures was sent back to the British king or to the British government, the Parliament. So basically, Parliament feels that these pipsqueak Americans who they had fought and died and suffered for and kept safe from the French and the Indians during the French-Indian War for 9 years, have no right to basically demand that they don't pay taxes. The Americans boycott the taxes. Some of them who become more violent actually abuse and attack tax collectors. They dip them in tar and put feathers on them. This is tarring and feathering. There are some really aggressive acts taken by a particular group known as the Sons of Liberty, who represent the more extreme wing of the Patriot movement. The Patriots are not just a New England football team. They refer to the Americans who were trying to fight for their independence and became more and more radicalized until they're eventually the leaders of the American Revolution. There are more benign elements of it, and there are more aggressive elements and sides to it, and the Sons of Liberty are probably the most aggressive and cutting edge of them all, led by people like Samuel Adams, who, yes, the beer is named after, and Paul Revere. So how does this work? What happens next? What was I going to say next? The British basically feel that because they've been taxed before and they've been receiving tax money from the colonies, the rates aren't too high. There should be no problem with the Americans paying them. But they boycott them, they create black markets, they embargo, they refuse to trade or buy British goods. And this really upsets the British, particularly with the Stamp Act, which taxes paper goods. Their paper good, obviously, paper goods are still extremely necessary. Stationery is very necessary today, but think about how necessary it would have been in the 1760s when you don't have any telephones, when you don't have the internet, when you don't have the printed word is completely reliant on paper. So the taxing of paper goods is a taxing on almost all social, political, economic activities in the colonial societies. And so the resistance to this is not universal. There's plenty of Americans or colonists who pay the taxes, who pay the extra fees and things like that, but there's plenty who are absolutely sick and tired of it and only are going to get more sick and tired as the time goes on, basically believing that they have not been represented properly in the British government. The British laugh off the idea of them having their own seats in Parliament to vote on whether they should be on what taxes they should be allotted. But this leads to the famous battle cry of the pre-Revolutionary War movement, the no taxation without representation. Basically, the Americans feel that unless they have a say in the running of the government, they should not be taxed by that government. And this is where there's a divide between the British and the Americans and their ideologies and their attitudes towards the war. While the British do see the Americans as complaining about very small tax increases, which they weren't really doing, they also see this idea as ludicrous. They are the ones who provided the safety. They are the ones who provided for their colonies and kept them safe from the French and the Indians. They are the ones who have allowed the colonies to basically function on their own independently as their own little governments and their own little countries, basically. And they had done this with all sorts of beneficence and kindness, and the colonies had become quite wealthy, stable, and secure because the British were willing to do this, and the British were willing to protect them. So their men had fought and died. Why shouldn't the colonials allow them into their homes and let them live there? Why shouldn't they pay a little bit higher in taxes to help stabilize the British economy after the war? Everybody did their part during the war. Why aren't they doing their part after the war? The American attitude is, we have had our own rules and our own government for so long. Why does the British government only now seek to demand tax hikes and the ability to tax us directly? What's next? There's a slippery slope argument here that actually is kind of true. Will they they're wanting soldiers in our homes? Will they close down our ports, occupy our cities, and take away our weapons? Spoiler alert, they will, but ironically it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because the actions of the colonists in boycotting against the British only lead the British to be more aggressive when it comes to repressing colonial rights and freedoms, which only makes the colonials more and more angry and justifies their idea that the British are becoming tyrannical. Basically, there's a lot of fear that the Americans basically felt they had a good thing going on, and because the British took care of them, but they also paid their taxes and they had their own self-government, and now why are things changing? The British basically feel they had a good thing going because the Americans were loyal and got to have self-government, and they weren't losing any rights or privileges by paying a little bit more in taxes, especially when their own taxes on their own people were much higher. But Americans, who were, like I said, political creatures heavily devoted to the idea of self-rule. And by the way, this only is really talking about wealthy white landowners. I have to make that point very clear. It is true that the vast majority, that women did not vote. African Americans, the vast majority of them were slaves. Indians, even if they lived among the colonists, were not considered to be colonials. And even back then, white men could not vote in large numbers. This was mainly wealthy white landowners who had the biggest say in the businesses and the economy of the time period. But this is but the economy, the economics, the taxes affected everyone, slave and free, male and female, Indian or a white man. So this leads to a growing tension and basically a vicious cycle whereby the relations continue to devolve. The cycle is very simple when it comes to the taxes. The British implement a tax. The tax is extremely unpopular. There's boycotting, tarring and feathering, embargoing, black markets, all of that, protests, and then the British repeal the tax, and the relationship gets worse until they introduce a new tax. And it happens over and over again. The Stamp Act is eventually repealed and replaced with the Townshend Acts. Charles Townshend and the British government hope in 1767 to get the Americans to pay taxes on other goods. They'll take away the taxes on paper, but they want lead, glass. These are, again, extremely important things in any day economy, but are extraordinarily important even for the Americans at this time. And it also taxes tea, which is extremely important, and I'll come back to. Tea, the British have gotten a lot of it from China and India, and is a common drink used by Americans and Brits back then. Remember, the Americans are very much British. They do not call themselves Americans. They do not drink black coffee, although coffee was drank by the Europeans at this time. Tea is the much more popular much more popular drink for the Americans and the Brits at this time. I'm not interacting with the chat as much because of a live stream lecture, so maybe at the end we'll have some time for Q&A, but we're talking about the American Revolutionary Movement and everything leading up to and including and after 4th of July. And so like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. So what happens next? Well, the Americans once again protest these taxes heavily, and the British eventually make an interesting concession. They get rid of all the taxes except the tax on tea, and that will come back to bite them. In 1770, tensions are escalating, and Boston has basically become the epicenter of American discontent, and the Massachusetts colony has become an extreme headache for the British government and for King George III. And the royal governor there, Charles Hutchinson, is seen doing everything he can to keep order. From the American perspective, he's doing everything he can to be tyrannical, and that becomes the more popular word. The more the British government squeezes and tries to keep Americans in line, the more the Americans see them as tyrannical as the conflict ensues. Again, this is part of the vicious cycle. The Americans just grow to see the British crown, the British monarchy, the British Parliament, and their local anyone who is a part of the royal side, of the loyalist side, that's the side that supports the king, as representing, protecting, and advocating for tyranny. So eventually, on a cold winter's night in early 1770, early 1770, a crowd of people are jarring with British soldiers who is living in the city. The British are sending more and more troops to garrison cities and ports. This is obviously causing more and more tensions. Hecklers start throwing rocks and glass at the British soldiers. The British soldiers, in a panic, in the middle of the snow and the dark night, fire into the crowd. 5 people are killed, including a black man named Crispus Attucks. Paul Revere, the local silversmith and printer, produces a printifice that shows it as a bloody massacre with the British greedily and aggressively shooting down peaceful protesters. That is an exaggeration and extraordinarily biased towards the Americans. John Adams defends the British soldiers in court, believing everyone should have a trial to right by jury, but the Americans see the British as not honoring that, especially when they insist that Americans need to be tried for military crimes and treason against the British by British military courts rather than their own courts. So again, this will come up later. 3 years later, when the British repeal the Townshend Acts, they keep the taxes on tea, and the Americans respond by dressing as, the Sons of Liberty respond by dressing as Native Americans and throwing the tea into Boston Harbor in the Boston Tea Party, December 16, 1773, one of the most important events in American history. Because from this point there is no turning back. The British Crown is furious, and and the Parliament passes the intolerable acts or the coercive acts, and try to get the double down, refusing to have their soldiers leave. They close down Boston Harbor. They force American families to house them, and I'm only using American because they're colonials or colonists, but they're not Americans yet. They don't have the concept of being Americans. They only have the concept of being the colonists of Virginia, and many of them saw themselves as loyal British subjects, and many of them worked towards peaceful resolutions as much as they could, despite the fact that the situation was becoming more and more problematic. Benjamin Franklin is a great example of someone who fought there could be a peaceful resolution to this that didn't lead to the Declaration of Independence. But basically, the intolerable acts only make things worse. Forcing the housing of British soldiers in American homes only infuriates the colonists more, and the continual aggression of the British in closing down American shipping and basically saying that if you're not going to pay any of these taxes, we're going to shut down your entire economy and your entire commercial way of life, particularly in New England, is disastrous for colonial businesses. And so things are getting worse. The British also begin to try to curtail the allotment of weapons. They know that many colonists fought in the 7 Years' War, or in the French Indian War, and many of them are skilled with muskets and rifles, and can obviously use those weapons when needed to. And many of them are training themselves. And there seems to be the development of a group of subversive militiamen who are ready to fight within a minute's notice, the famous Minutemen. So there's definitely rising tensions. And when the Americans stockpile weapons, I think it's in Boston, the British decide that they've had enough, and they send a very large force, thousands of men, to land near Boston to basically, I think it might have been Concord. I'm trying to think of the city where they were stockpiling weapons in Massachusetts. But on April 18th, 1775, a large British force comes both by land and sea, despite meaning there were two lights in the Old North Church. And Paul Revere and several other leaders of the Sons of Liberty ride to warn other people about what was happening and to get ready, to gather their munitions, to get their guns, to get their muskets, and be ready to meet the British. And this is what leads to Lexington and Concord, the first two battles of the American Revolution, where basically a ragtag group of colonial militiamen, the Minutemen, square up against a much larger British force in front of them. And basically, the way you fought back then was you were lined up, and you would get close in an open field. You would be able to see your enemy, your opponent, and you would basically lift up your musket. You would load it, which would take a little while, and then you would fire it at them. And these musket balls were extraordinarily thick. If they punctured your skin, they expanded and twisted, so the wounds were extraordinarily brutal. They're almost like hollow point ammunition today, for those of you who know about how weapons work, guns. So the British and the Americans square up. Nobody knows who fires the shot, but it is later called the shot heard round the world. And on April 19th, 1775, this is the beginning of the first shot is fired at Lexington, Massachusetts, and this is the beginning of the American Revolution. Now, obviously, nobody envisions a full-scale war with all the colonies joining, but as time goes on, more and more colonies will join, more and more men will join to fight together from different corners and areas of the American colonies, be they in Massachusetts, which owns Vermont and Maine at the time. The Green Mountain Boys are from Vermont, that's Ethan Allen. They're a group of basically a ragtag group of guerrilla soldiers ready to fight at a moment's notice, whether they're from Pennsylvania or New York and the larger cities, or whether they're from southern states. They will slowly but surely stop seeing themselves as colonies and start seeing themselves as states, and stop seeing the British as their overlords who they're just bickering with, and start seeing them as the tyrannical monster that they must defeat and separate themselves from. Meanwhile, a group of leaders, social and political leaders in the colonies, had been meeting for a while during the First Continental Congress and had sent a petition called the Olive Branch Petition to try to resolve tensions between the British and the Americans peacefully. This did not work, and because of this, the British and the Americans, the tensions get worse. The British refused the Olive Branch Petition, which had basically called for the end of the taxation and for things to basically go back to the way they had been before. And so things are only getting worse, but many Americans, particularly the more educated elites, try to work for a peaceful solution to this. Ben Franklin eventually comes back, and he joins. That's the First Continental Congress. They adjourn, and then they rejoin at Carpenter's Hall, now Independence Hall, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was the state legislature building at the time, or the colonial legislature building. And Franklin will team up with Jefferson, John Hancock, and all the other founding fathers at the Second Continental Congress, except one. The First Continental Congress had approved the creation, I believe it was the First Continental Congress, had said that they would begin arming colonial soldiers as necessary and create an army if needed. And I think it might be the Second Continental Congress that approves the designation of a continental army with a particular officer in mind. Now, as I talked about him earlier, George Washington, I had not, until I saw the movie last night, I had a good idea that Washington had been a colonel. He had been involved in the 7 Years' War. I knew about him rescuing Braddock's troops when Braddock was ambushed. Washington was not a peon or a neophyte when it came to military tactics, and he knew how the British fought very, very well, being a colonel in the French Indian War. So he is the most experienced American officer, but like Generals Horatio Gates or Mad Anthony Wayne, I think. I'm trying to think of who else. He had experience fighting not just the Indians, but against the French and with the British. So he knew European military tactics, which is extremely important because you're fighting the second largest or largest military fighting force in the world. It's either Britain or France at this time. And Britain is, of course, known for its amazing navy, which will be challenged pretty admirably by John Paul Jones at sea. And so they choose. So John Adams, who is the great idea man of the Founding Fathers and the most underrated of all the Founding Fathers, really, recommends George Washington to lead the Continental Army. Now, George Washington, I've glazed his early life and how he became a great leader. And obviously, movies are movies, and they are not. It wasn't a documentary. There's obviously loosey-goosey stuff, sensationalized accounts and exaggerations, jingoism and patriotism all can disrupt the history. But Washington is a capable leader. He is a great general, and he's an extremely courageous man, and he's also humble and honest. The cherry tree story is not true, but Washington does have a reputation for being an honest gentleman farmer, as they call it. And this is the vision of many of the founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson, who you see there, that America should be run by these gentleman farmers who are not gentlemen in the sense that they own many slaves on large plantations, but are gentlemen in the sense that they are respectable men, they are educated, they know the proper ways to behave in public company, and they are learned, and they are quiet, and they are humble, and they are benefactors of charitable organizations, of churches, and supporters of the proper ethical and moral ideas for a proper society to be run. And that is definitely George Washington. Now, there's a lot of ink that's been spilled on this. I've talked about it a lot on this channel. People ask about it all the time. The founding fathers were not universally religious people, in the sense they were not the only main religion in America. The only real religion in America at this time is Christianity. There are debates between various different Christian denominations. New England is formed by Puritans and Pilgrims, more of a Calvinistic, which later becomes known as the Congregationalist Church of America. The South is heavily influenced by the Crown, so you have the rise of Anglicanism, and the American form of that will become known as the Episcopalian Church. Maryland is the Catholic colony, a refuge for Catholics who are heavily persecuted at this time in the United States, and will be for a long time to come. So you have Baptists and Methodists in the South. You have a Second Great Awakening, the religious influences of George Whitefield, a good friend of Benjamin Franklin's, as well as Jonathan Edwards, who heavily influence colonial religious revival during the 1730s and 40s and preach about religious liberty and freedom, which inspires many of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence and America's founding. That if people can make individual choices to accept Jesus Christ as their Savior, they can also if they can make such a grand, infinite, immense thing that will impact them for eternity, which is what we talked about last week when we were talking about the Crusades. This idea of the eternal versus the temporal, the secular, the sacred versus the secular. If they can make those everlasting, eternal changes through their decision to follow Christ, then they can also make those decisions about their government. And they can make those, and one of the huge tenets of the preaching of the Second Great Awakening is people should be allowed to choose how they worship God, because their relationship with God is personal. So that means no establishment of a particular state religion or state church or state denomination, in not just the United States later on, but in all of the colonies, in all of the states. That's why even though the United States, in the Constitution, there's the freedom of religion, individual states cannot form and make churches. But the colonies had churches the colonial sponsored churches, and if you weren't part of that, you had to pay taxes. In Virginia, if you were not an Episcopalian, you had to pay taxes if you wanted to be a Methodist to it, almost like a jizya in Islam. So there's really so the founding fathers, although not necessarily all of them Bible-believing Christians, understood the importance of the morals and ethical values of Christianity in the formation of their society. Many of them believed that Providence had guided them towards revolution. Providence had basically intervened to let them win the revolution, and had allowed them, and God had given them this incredible chance to create their own governments. Many of them also believed that God was on their side during and after the war. And some of them were very much Christians in their daily lives. Some of them were deists. Some of them believed that that on a practical level, Christianity worked because the society was Christian. But I think almost all of them believed that the best ethics and virtues for a society they were trying to create was a Judeo-Christian lens, informed by the Old and New Testaments, and by doctrines of scriptures and doctrines that could justify religious toleration, freedom of expression, and things like that. So that's the quick aside there about the religious influence in the founding of America. But George Washington seems to be, although not publicly very vocal about what religion he practiced, and definitely influenced by his Masonic connections, as well as the fact that he was unaffiliated in many ways with a denomination, seems to have been some form of Christian. It would be, if you want to be more, well, the founders were deists, look at Jefferson and the Jeffersonian Bible, look at Ben Franklin's writings, although both of them seem to be very, very persuaded that there was there were natural rights. This comes from the English philosopher John Locke, and those natural rights are unalienable, and they come from God. They are not given to you by the king but because you exist, because you are a human, because you are part of the created order of God, you have these rights, and they cannot be taken away from you by the government. They can only be protected. And if you take away someone else's, that might be a different story, but your rights are protected because they come from God. Now, that is the basic idea that they got from the English Enlightenment. People like John Locke were extraordinarily influential. The British governmental system was extraordinarily influential on the foundation and formation of the American governmental system. Let me see here. So getting back to what we were, so the bigger issue, the Americans feel the need to create a continental army. They put George Washington as the most experienced officer in charge of it. Washington doesn't get there until July of 1770. He is appointed in July of 1775, and then he goes to Boston, where most of the fighting is going on. The Americans do square up against the British in an extraordinarily important battle, the Battle of Bunker Hill outside of Boston. This is where the famous phrase, "Don't shoot until you see the whites of their eyes," meaning you had to get very close and then fire your muskets for the best accuracy, because these muskets were not extraordinarily accurate, was originally probably used. The British and Americans fight there. The Americans lose, but actually are able to hold their own. They're able to cause a lot of casualties against the British. They're able to not just run away scared when men fall down dead. They don't just break. Their morale is stronger than expected, and they're able to hold on and maintain their lines. And this is enough to make the British realize that the Americans are good fighters and are not just going to go away. They do believe the Americans are a bunch of rabble-rousers. They're uncultured, they're uncouth, and they can eventually break their spirits, and they have plenty of loyalists who are willing to support them, men like Benjamin Franklin's son, Benjamin Franklin Jr., and there's a lot of loyalist support in the South where there's less fighting. Most of the fighting during the early part of the war is in New England and the middle colonies of New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So Washington takes over the colonial army, and with help from Ethan Allen and another man named Benedict Arnold, who will later betray the American cause because his wife was British and he was passed up for recognition and promotion by Washington. One of the oversights of Washington, one of the rare mistakes of George Washington in terms of handling his officer corps was the mistreatment of Benedict Arnold. It's not necessarily his fault. It's people like Horatio Gates manipulating Saratoga, which I'll talk about in a minute. But Washington, Benedict Arnold, and Allen capture Fort Ticonderoga, and then from upstate New York bring a bunch of cannons and basically surround the city of Boston, and the British abandon the city, and the Americans win a huge victory there at the end of 1775. So despite the fact that the Americans are definitely outgunned, outmanned, and outmaneuvered in many, many ways by the much more impressive British Army and Navy, they have had some impressive victories. But John Paul Jones will win some incredible victories, the Balmoral Richard, in the North Sea against the British Navy. So there's definitely some big victories for the Americans there. The Americans also realized that this might be a chance to make a geopolitical statement. They need the help. They can really weaken the British. They're not going to be able to win this war unless they weaken the British by bringing in someone else. And they decide to they really court the French heavily. The French would love to get revenge for their loss. So the Americans, who fought against the French in the past, and will fight against, well, actually the United States has never fought a war against the French. Now I think about it, that's not true. The United States has helped other countries fight wars against the French. They have not directly fought a war with the French themselves. They decide to basically petition the French, and they send the most experienced, charismatic ambassador, the most cultured man in all of the country, Ben Franklin, to France in order to curry their favor. And the French are not crazy about it at first, and they need political and military proof of America's seriousness in declaring independence from the British, and they also need the Americans to prove they can beat the British on the battlefield, and that it would actually be worth their time and investment to strike out against the British and weaken them by robbing them of their colonies. And so there are two things that must happen because of this. One, the Americans need to make a very pure and strong statement about their political intentions. And with the failure of the Olive Branch petition and the escalation of the war, and with Washington beginning to man and build up fortifications around New York for a British invasion by the great General William Howe, The Americans decide to make a very strong political statement that they hope will curry the favor of foreign powers. Before they send Franklin over to France, they decide in June of 1776 to write a document declaring the grievances they have against the king and basically explaining the reasons for why they are going to separate from the British Empire, become their own country, a declaration of independence. And by the way, you can hear me read the entire document. That's available. Harsonet, please put that in the chat. That's my most recent video. Go and hear me read the Declaration of Independence to you and give some background on it. June 28th, June 11th, I think, Thomas Jefferson is nominated once again by John Adams to write the Declaration of Independence, and the Committee of Five is created. Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams will get all the attention, as well as these two men. These two men are part of the Committee of Five, but they are not obviously John Adams or Benjamin Franklin. There's Jefferson obviously in the front. This is, I think, on the left is Roger Sherman of Connecticut, who will be important in the American constitutional story, and Robert Livingston of New York. And these two founding fathers are also very important and help write the document. But Jefferson writes the main bulk of it, and then Adams and Franklin and the others make some revisions. And so over time, they eventually devise the Declaration of Independence that is presented to the Continental Congress on June 28th, and then a final version is signed by the president, John Hancock, with his giant signature, a shipping magnate from Massachusetts. On July 2nd, they sign it, and on July 4th, it is proclaimed and approved by the Continental Congress, and word goes out to the local area, and a bell is rung. That is, of course, the Liberty Bell. Didn't have the giant crack in it back then, but I have videos about almost all of this stuff. John Hancock, short videos if you want to check them out. We've been doing American history shorts every day since last week, so to celebrate America's 250th, its semi-quincentennial. A happy birthday to the United States, and I hope you are enjoying this. If you are, please double tap that screen, like and subscribe. And this is considered the birthday of America. Now, America is not the only country with a birthday. That's absolutely absurd, but there is significance in the fact that America chose to create itself its own nation, not created by blood, but by ethnic culture or by cultural development, but by a political decision of letting freedom ring on July 4th, 1776. They had no idea what the impact that this document would have on the future politicization of different movements all across the world, from the French Revolution to Vietnam, all across the world. Revolutionary movements have in tone Jefferson's words, including the most famous that come from the preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, which among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And these rights are unalienable. They are given to you by God. You cannot have them taken away. The state cannot take them away from you unless you violate the rules of the state. This is reiterated in the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Life, liberty, and property cannot be seized except in the actions of legal punitive measures. So Jefferson borrows this from Locke. It's almost completely plagiarized from him. He also borrows from Aristotle. He writes a provision and a prohibition against slavery, and we need to talk about that as well. We talked about the religion of the founding fathers, so we need to talk about slavery. In 1619, the first slaves are brought to what becomes the United States, and the United States history is changed and shaped forever by the horrible legacy of slavery in America. And there is a contradiction and a paradoxical nature to the relationship between slave owners and slaves. It is obvious that slave owners see these slaves as their property, but they also have to interact with them like they are humans because they are humans. And there is a racial element to it that becomes more and more pronounced, especially as you declare your independence and you say all men are created equal. Well, these men have to be inferior in some way, shape, or form, and the only way you can make that difference is based off of the color of their skin and their physical traits. And so racism isn't created by the Declaration of Independence or the Founding Fathers. Hatred of ethnicities, tribalism has existed all throughout human history, and there are horrific examples of it of Africans and Middle Easterners against white Europeans in the past. Thomas Jefferson himself will fight a war to stop pirates who, from Africa, were capturing and kidnapping white Americans and Europeans for a long, long time. The Barbary Coast War of 1802, when he is president. 26 years after this. The America was, in many ways, a nation of slaves. The South was dominated, was already starting to be dominated in its society, its culture, its agriculture, its economy by slavery. Slavery was still heavily practiced throughout the middle colonies. It was only in New England where slavery was becoming inappropriate and more or less abolished in many of those places. But many of the founding fathers owned slaves. Some of them had owned slaves passively. And again, the owning of slaves does not mean you have a giant, large plantation like Gone with the Wind. Some of them did. Jefferson certainly has it at Monticello. Washington has it, and he gets his white slaves at Mount Vernon. He had his own slaves too. The large estate plantations are uncommon. It is really only a top 1% thing. Most people, if they own slaves, owned a few at a time for various intermittent periods of their lives. Benjamin Franklin's a good example of this. John Adams doesn't own slaves. He's a heavy abolitionist, as Franklin is by this time in his life. And so there is a huge tension that is only justified by racial discrimination, which has already existed but only becomes more prevalent, between all men are created equal except these men. Jefferson writes a prohibition against slavery in the Declaration, and it is Franklin, the abolitionist, who crosses it out. This is a slave owner writing a prohibition, knowing full well that it will alienate people like himself in the South. And Franklin says, no, we can't have this. And the logic is, and Franklin will reiterate this logic later at the Constitutional Convention, that if you really get rid of the slaves, you will create nothing but chaos. There will be no unity. There will be nothing to stand up to. We won't be able to stand up to the British, and we won't be able to stand on our own, because the sovereign states and colonies will not stand for it, and they will leave. And then instead of a civil war in the 1860s, you may have one in the 1790s. You will have several different Americas. You will have several different countries. There will be no United States. It will be a divided states issue from the beginning. And the phrase United States, if I'm correct, is not in the Declaration. It might be. No, it's in the Constitution. But there is obviously this idea of states, of if they declare their independence, they are states, and they are one nation, and that is the American nation, although Benjamin Franklin also proposed that they change the name of the country to Columbia and adopt the turkey as its national bird. Thank God neither of those things happened, and they had the bald eagle instead. So, and of course, it's not Columbia, it's not the United States of Columbia, it's the United States of America. So, the point I'm trying to make is that the tension was there. The paradoxical tension was there. Many of the founding fathers realized that slavery was wrong. Many also believed slavery would die out quickly. The cotton gin, unfortunately and ironically, against the wishes of Eli Whitney, proved that wasn't the case. So that is why the Civil War is called the Second American Revolution in many ways. Lincoln is applying the principles of Jefferson and Washington to a larger group of people that have been denied it for a long, long time. Women are seen as domestic pieces. They are not obviously a cornerstone of a family. And despite the protestations of people like Abigail Adams, who write extensively to her husband about political emancipation for women, their relationship is an incredible one, by the way. And if you want to learn more about the First Ladies, subscribe to my Patreon, where I have a series on the First Ladies. And I talk about John and Abigail Adams, and it's a great love story. But it's also a story of a lot of strong opinions between two of the most intelligent people in American history. And if you don't think that a woman like Abigail Adams, just because she wasn't as educated or as politically involved as her husband, can't be as intelligent as him, you don't know anything about women. Oftentimes women are smarter than men anyways. So, and that's not simp talk, that's just life, that's just logic, that's just obvious. So my whole point being that the founding fathers saw the tensions, especially when it came to the mistreatment of slaves. They didn't really care about the Native Americans. The Native Americans were seen as foreigners who owned foreign land and were seen as savage enemies. In fact, one of the grievances, there's an entire list of grievances in the Declaration, was the king was the perception that the king had given preference to the savages, as they call them, the natives. That was the term for them back then. This is not me being racist. To basically ransack the Western territories and frontier and close that area off to the Americans. This had very much frustrated the colonies for a long time. It seemed that the British, in order to live up to their promises of allowing the natives to stay in the Ohio River Valley territories, had prevented the colonists from doing the same thing. This was seen as preferential treatment for savages over their own supposed countrymen. But the British had never seen the colonists as completely politically or socially equal anyways. So, moving forward, the Americans, the Declaration it does not have contradictions, but there are contradictions between the way America was run and the way people live their lives, and there are concessions made and overtones made so that the Americans can win the revolution, become one country, and then operate that country with a correct form of government. That's the Constitution, and that means concessions are made to the sovereign states, including a lot of political leadership and also the allowance for slavery to continue. The United States, slavery is a stain upon the legacy of America. It is a horrible, horrible sin if you're looking at it from a moral perspective in American history. However, the United States, within 100 years, will have ended slavery after it's getting created. Most countries do not have that. The vast majority of societies and civilizations in human history took thousands of years to end slavery. Slavery perpetually continued in Arabia, in Africa, in other parts of the world, long after the Americans had ended slavery. And while many, at the same time, Latin American countries ended slavery without civil wars. Argentina is a good example of this. And it took an entire war to actually get rid of slavery, which is saying something about how perniciously powerful it was in America. And Franklin, in his wisdom and foresight, probably realized that a civil war would be a horrible successor to the Revolutionary War, or multiple countries could not hang together. This is where the concept of join or die comes from. And while we always have the "don't tread on me" snake flag, that is not the flag that they use going into battle. One of the flags that the Americans used going into battle was a snake that was divided up into pieces, and each piece had a name of a colony. And the whole idea was that if united we stand, divided we fall. If you do not hang together, as Franklin says, you will hang separately. Meaning that if you do not hang in together, you will hang separately. It's a very cheeky phrase. Franklin's known for this. Which brings me to my next point. The Declaration of Independence is a death warrant. It is Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and all the others, starting with Hancock on downwards, signing their death warrants, making it very clear that they are all treasonous traitors to the British Crown. And if the British had won the American Revolution, which they were on the verge of doing many times, then every single one of these men would have been executed as examples, and the British Museum would hold the Declaration of Independence as an example of what happens to Yankee traitors. That is the absolute truth. By the way, the phrase Yankee Doodle Dandy, Yankees are the slur that the British use for all Americans, not just Northerners, not just people from New York who watch baseball. Yankees is also an insult that the Southerners will use about the Union in the Civil War. The Yankee Doodle Dandy is an insult about a particular American by the British, and the Americans like the insult so much that they turned that song into their song. And capitalize on it. Because a dandy is what the British called them, somebody who's really well dressed up, and the Americans decided to take advantage of that insult, write a song about it, and make it their own. So there's the story of Yankee Doodle Dandy. But basically, all of these men realize that unless they join together, unless all of the states are working together, they have no chance of freedom. And therefore, that means concessions have to be made even to the slave states. And that's something that they're going to have to do over and over again. And many of them believe slavery would die out anyways. Now, was there personal greed and ambition and paradoxes where, of course, they had their own slaves, so they were worried about what would happen if they had to get rid of them? Absolutely. But there were many men in Carpenter's Hall then and later at the Constitutional Convention who would never have participated if they were told they'd have to give up their slaves. What else? What happens next? Again, these principles are extraordinarily good. They're very lovely, but they are a death warrant unless the Americans win the war, which they are not doing. Washington is horribly defeated at the Battle of New York. It is a terrible loss, the worst of his military career, and he is forced to retreat. And under the cover of nightfall, he makes a very daring escape across the Delaware River into New Jersey, where he wins two important battles at Trenton and Newark at the end of 1776 and the beginning of 1777, respectively. But the American cause does seem in trouble. The Founding Fathers are forced to flee from Philadelphia. The Liberty Bell is actually hidden away in Allentown, Pennsylvania for quite some time. And the British are sitting pretty. They have an extraordinarily large force controlling New York, led by William Howe and later General George Clinton. Not from Parliament. Well, that's kind of funny, George Clinton, Parliament. There you go. I guess that's why they call that band that name. The Americans need a victory desperately as Washington hides in Pennsylvania for the winter of Valley Forge, which will be an absolutely brutal and devastating horrid winter, men full of disease, exposure to the elements, lack of proper nourishment care. They're underpaid. The continental money has no value. There is no system in which they can pay their debts. They are not a recognized government by the rest of the world. So the American government, the Continental government, the Continental Congress, doesn't have any real power. They can print money, but the money doesn't really have any value. They cannot provide proper munitions, proper rations, proper clothing, supplies, insulation, and structure for the men at Valley Forge. So they endure a harsh and horrific winter. And Washington, although an officer with the ability through his own resources and those provided to him by the Continental Congress to access those resources, chooses instead to suffer with his men in one of the most daring and self-sacrificial moments. And and he actually circulates the writings of Thomas Paine, who had written Common Sense and then writes The Plight of Man or something like that, two different extraordinarily important treatises that condemn the British and encourage the Americans to join the revolutionary cause, and more Americans do. Originally, about a third of the Americans actually are fighting for as patriots against the British or contributing to it, and then as time goes on, more and more join the cause. Washington suffers mightily, and many of his losses and his setbacks are not his fault. He just doesn't have the proper training and resources and time to actually be able to do that. But he does get some help from Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian officer who comes over and trains Washington's troops how to properly drill and fight with European military tactics against the superior British army. And that will lead Washington out of Valley Forge eventually with a lot more confidence, a much better trained army that is finally getting the equipment they need. Before Valley Forge, however, Generals Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold win a surprising victory in upstate New York at Saratoga. Now, the Americans had already tried to invade Canada and failed mightily both times by this point, but this victory keeps the British from invading through Canada into New York. And it's a huge victory. Gates takes all the credit. Nobody really gives Arnold the credit he deserves, which will eventually lead to his treason. And this is the excuse Franklin needs to explain to the French the need for them to join the conflict. So the French do. They send over two extraordinarily important officers, the Comte de Rochambeau, which Comte is not his name, it is his title, like Count, and of course the Marquis de Lafayette, who was already over here helping and becomes like Washington's surrogate son and will make many visits to the United States and France as he helps lead the French into their revolution 15 years later. The Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, the French equivalent of a Declaration of Independence, is written partially by Thomas Jefferson, and the Marquis de Lafayette just kind of copies from Jefferson's ideas. So the French agreeing to help means this is a European conflict, which means there's a more global aspect to it. Some people have argued that this makes it a world war. They don't understand what I mean when I say the 7 Years' War is a world war. The Spanish and the Dutch will also help. Weakening the British is a big geopolitical power move, and it allows the American colonies to get their freedom. The British will turn their attention to the South after a couple of stalemate battles that are really victories for the Americans, where Washington is able to show that his forces can fight against the British and win. And so there's kind of a stalemate in the North after Monmouth and Brandywine, and the attention turns south. And in the South, there's more loyalists, and the British are hoping to build up enough support with the loyalists to crush the Americans there and get Washington to surrender. And so the leader of the British Army there, I think it's Charles Cornwallis throughout. It might have been another general, but Charles Cornwallis is one of the leaders of that, and you're going to hear that name again. They win several huge victories against the Americans. The Americans are very disorganized. They're much more militia. They're much more guerrilla in their warfare tactics. They fight in swamps and in forests. They hide away. They are not organized. They are not trained with any sort of military tactics that Washington and his men got the training from Steuben. And of course, Washington got that training much earlier when he was fighting during the French-Indian War. Daniel Morgan, who is a French-Indian War veteran, eventually starts whipping them into shape. You have the Forest Fox, I think was his name, or the Swamp Fox, Francis Marion, who kind of organizes these ragtag teams of American soldiers who are fighting in basically any terrain possible in order to undermine and fight against the British. A very young Andrew Jackson becomes a scout for the Americans after his town is destroyed, and a British officer slashes him across the face with his scythe. Bannister Tarleton, the leader of the British Cavalry Brigades, raids various different various different towns and areas all throughout North and South Carolina, bringing absolute horrific devastation. By the way, he is the main villain in Patriot. I believe they call him Tarleton in that war. But the bad guy that Mel Gibson kills is supposed to be Bannister Tarleton in the Patriot, which is a very, very good movie, but not accurate in every aspect, but obviously an extremely well-made movie because Mel Gibson loves killing British guys. He does that in Braveheart. He does it there. So eventually, Washington sends his second in command, his best general named Nathaniel Greene, to the south. And Nathaniel Greene is able to whip the American army into shape. He's able to give it the proper training, and he's able to to push back against the British at Guilford Courthouse and later at Cowpens. And the Americans start to really uh, uh, they win some significant victories against the British in North Carolina. And this pushes Cornwallis to retreat to up towards Virginia in the Chesapeake Bay, hoping that George Clinton and his forces will come from New York and land there. They can unify their forces and defeat the American Southern Army. Washington sees his opportunity with this news and then begins traveling down south to meet with Greene's army. When the British get to Yorktown, Virginia, they are terrified to find a French fleet there. The French have sent an army and a fleet, and the British are trapped, and Washington's army shows up just in time to mix with Greene's, and Cornwallis, seeing that he is out of options, surrenders. Despite the fact that the British have an extraordinarily large force in New York, this is the last major battle of the war. The British Parliament early in 1782 declares that they are done fighting, that the news of Yorktown, which took months to reach them, has obviously been very devastating, and that the war has not gone the way they wanted, and they just decide they can leave these pathetic 13 colonies alone, because what damage are they going to do? How are they are not possibly going to become the greatest nation in the world. And the French and the Americans and the Brits begin making peace talks, and like everywhere for some reason at this time period, the Treaty of Paris is what we get the result of in 1783. John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin negotiate the peace. Jefferson then becomes America's first major ambassador to France, while John Adams goes to England. And Britain recognizes America's independence, and the war is officially over. The American Revolution is over. The Declaration of Independence now stands. The governing documents, the Articles of Confederation, are way too weak, so the Americans will meet again in Philadelphia in 1787 to create the constitutional system. And you know what? I think I'm going to do next week's live stream lecture about the constitutional system. And what I mean is not just the story of the Constitution, but how the American government is supposed to work. So next week, for our live stream lecture, we're going to continue this. This will be a two-parter, just like the Crusades was. We'll also do a second topic next Sunday, the 12th. Yeah, we'll do that, 4 p.m. Eastern, as always. And that will be about the American constitutional system, but it will also be about a topic you vote for here exclusively on YouTube and also on Discord. And you can join our Discord and join all of our discussions in the chat below. You can also subscribe to the Patreon and read my articles on Substack. I will be writing one about America's 250th birthday. I haven't written one in a while, but there are plenty of articles available for you. We are just over an hour in, so this was a good live stream lecture. It was a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack, and I did not cover all of it. I kind of had to sum up everything at the end of the war. There's a lot to talk about the war itself. Washington turns down the ability to become a king in order to become the leader of the Constitutional Convention and, of course, eventually America's first president. But we are not done. I'm going to stay for 15 minutes and answer any questions you have about history or social studies, hopefully American only. Yesterday, 2 hours with Uncle Sam was all American history, I'm told. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. But today I'm going to be a little bit more open. Our Q&As are almost always any type of history. So I'd love to talk more American history. I'd love to talk about America's founding. I'd love to talk about the principles that shaped America. This is the first part of those principles. The second part will be in the Constitution. Obviously, the legacy of the American Revolution is huge. If you want to talk about legacy. The American Revolution inspires the French Revolution. The French are bankrupt afterwards, which will also inspire the Revolution. Directly and indirectly, the American Revolution causes the French Revolution. The British will colonize Australia in order to make up for their loss in America. James Cook had just landed there a couple years prior. And basically, obviously, the rest is history. I hate to say it so trite, but America will become the United States. So the 13 colonies will become the most powerful nation in human history. And while the Roman Empire, the Mongolian Empire, the British Empire are all superior in terms of power when it comes to productivity, wealth, and influence, as well as military advancement, even proportionally, the United States is probably better than all of them. This is not bias of American, this is actual fact. Now, in real numbers, the United States does not control the land that Russia or the Mongolians or the British or the Romans controlled. It doesn't have the historical legacy that the Roman Empire has, but it does have, but in terms of raw strength of society, wealth, and standard of living, the United States is superior to all of them. Even on a proportional scale, they probably are superior as well. So this nation, the United States, is by all metrics, the most prosperous and powerful nation that has ever existed. And nobody could have foreseen that in 1775. Nobody could have even foreseen it in 1783. The United States was a pipsqueak and an upstart and would be like that until after the Civil War in many, many ways. So the truth of the matter is all of American history is because of this. And we'll talk about how they survived next Sunday. And again, they had to survive a second revolution in the Civil War. So, yeah, the legacy of the American Revolution is multitudinous. Obviously, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin were not hung as traitors. They became some of the most important political figures in history. The British Empire, despite its loss, which probably was a pretty bad one in retrospect, end up becoming the most powerful empire, the largest empire in terms of land and population controlled in human history, and that is no small feat. And they did that without the Americans. I hope you really enjoyed this. If you did, like and subscribe. And like I said, I'll give you about 15 more minutes of questions about history and social studies. I'll look through the chat and see if there's anything there. We've got Imported, Jeremy, lots of other great friendly neighbor historians. Caprello is here to tell me that I'm misunderstood and don't know history, and I'm misinformed. Please tell me what I am misinformed about, Caprello. And thank you, Mike, for the super chat. All the money you give to this channel, whether through super chats or becoming a member, goes into this channel so I can improve the quality of the stuff we do here. Love to hear about how colonies became states after the war. Maybe how states became multiple. What? North Carolina and South Carolina have been divided, I think, in the 1720s. I forget exactly why. But eventually Massachusetts and Virginia are the Northwest Ordinance does not allow Pennsylvania and Virginia to claim all those territories. Instead, they are given territorial status independent of those states. Massachusetts, likewise, is forced to give up Vermont and Maine. And they became states. They adopted the Articles of Confederation. They elected their own state governors. They created their own state governments and adopted and accepted the Declaration of Independence and then the Articles of Confederation, which was the governmental system of the time, during the late 1770s. So that was going on the political side as the war continued from state to state. Jefferson leads this charge in Virginia, being its governor. And a lot of them have developed state constitutions that are similar to the U.S. Constitution or are influenced by the Articles of Confederation or the Declaration of Independence. Let me see here. I put a lot of cities on the map. You're welcome. Okay. I know that American identity was shaped after the War of Independence, but I wonder, when did the individual state identity, like Virginian identity, created opposed to British identity? Early on, this is part of the self-government, in their colonial history, these places were forming their identity based on who founded them, why they were founded, what their mission was, and what they did, and what it meant to be from this colony. So those colonial identities are part of a salutary neglect, which undermines the control the British have on them. So any sort of what's seen as oversight or overreaction by the British will be seen as tyrannical by the very independent, spirited, politically aware Americans. That's just how it worked back then. Let me see. Old Hickory and Young Hickory got us land we have today. Well, Old Hickory being, Young Hickory being James Polk and Old Hickory being Andrew Jackson. That's true. Those presidents were very aggressive in promoting westward expansion at the cost of the Native Americans and the Mexicans and the British. But that is true, Trevor. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed what we talked about. Silver, I appreciate it. Imported, great to see you as always. I'm interacting with the chat now because we're done with our live stream lecture. So hopefully you're liking and subscribing and thinking of some questions or topics to talk about. Let me see. Happy 4th of July to everybody. Hopefully you're still celebrating America's semi-quincentennial. Its 250th birthday. We'll talk about the American Senate, but it was inspired by the Roman Senate. We'll talk about James Madison a lot next week. And that'll be 2 topics next Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll talk about the constitutional system and how the American government works. And then we'll talk about whatever topic you'd like to. You get to vote. A vegetarian who moans about eating. Okay. All right. People are making political arguments for some reason. Washington wasn't an heir to slavery or a builder of slavery. He married into it. He freed all the slaves. After Martha died in 1802, his slaves went free. Patriot's a great movie. Let me see here. We're arguing about milk. This is interesting. I don't know if Hars put the videos in the chat. I don't know if he's even here anymore. Remove the Native Indian, 1830. The Indian Removal Act of Andrew Jackson, which was overturned by the Supreme Court, and then Jackson promptly ignored the court. Very, very fascinating. Let me see. Okay, I don't see a lot of history back there, just people arguing. But let's see, what have we got now? Let me see. Thank God Almighty for our Christian founding fathers. Unfortunately, Democrats founded the KKK. A lot of the founding fathers would be Democrats today. Not all, but a lot of them. They had political disagreements about the size and role of government in the economic and social sides of America back then. What happened to the loyalists who supported the Brits in the emerging United States? Some of them were sent to Britain. Some of them moved to Canada. Some of them just eventually acquiesced. Treaty of Tripoli, I believe that's what ends the Barbary Coast Wars. In God We Trust was added to the currency in the 1950s by Dwight Eisenhower. You can go watch my video on the Pledge of Allegiance. They added these terms because they were fighting against the secular communists. Obviously, they are not contrary to, despite being later additions to the declaration, to the money and to the Pledge of Allegiance, they are not afterthoughts. The concepts of America being a country, a religious country, dominated by the Christian religion and loyal to the Christian God, is not propaganda. It's pretty much how America was, generally speaking. You can't have the history of America without a Christian influence, for better or for worse. And even if you're not a Christian, and many of you are not, and that's fine. I don't say whether I'm a Christian or not, what religion I am. That doesn't matter. The point is, it's a historical fact that the United States was founded on Christian principles, influenced heavily by the Christian worldview, and many of the founding fathers and early American and mostly all of the early American leaders were presidents of one form or another. How devout they were, how sincere they were, is another question for debate. If you could swap out anyone on Mount Rushmore, who would it be and why? Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, because I love all four of those presidents. In fact, I would say Jefferson above Kennedy. I've often said, no, wait, I put Jefferson at 4, Kennedy at 5. That's what I've done. Never mind. Jefferson is a better president than Kennedy. I don't think any of them should go. Jefferson would be the lowest, but Jefferson was an incredible president. It's really the only reason that we don't think about Thomas Jefferson's presidency as highly as we do someone like Washington or Lincoln is because Jefferson's pre-war legacy in forming the American system by writing the Declaration of Independence is so influential that we forget that he was president very successfully for 8 years, doubled the size of the United States, created Jeffersonian democracy. I mean, the guy is one of the most brilliant political minds in history. When did the U.S. shift to become Hamiltonian instead of Jeffersonian, and why we still don't remember Hamilton the same way we remember Jefferson? Hamilton never became president. Hamilton couldn't become president. He wasn't born in the United States or in the colonies. And I don't know. And the debate is a strong federal central government versus individual rights and sovereignty, and that was the debate between Hamilton and Jefferson in Washington's White House in his cabinet. As Jefferson was the first Secretary of State and Hamilton the first Secretary of Treasury. And I don't know if the United States is more Hamiltonian than it is Jeffersonian. Hamilton obviously creates the American banking system. Jefferson becomes president and influences the entire next generation of politicians to think in terms of individualism, basically taking classical liberal ideas and implementing them into the government, paying off the federal debt, limiting the power of the government. These are all libertarian principles that Jefferson was espoused throughout his presidency. That's extremely influential in the mind of Americans, because Americans are not only political creatures, they are very freedom-minded political creatures. If you find the back of Mount Rushmore or native Sablo over it, I don't even know what you're saying, Christopher. Let me see. Didn't the Iroquois support the Brits? What were the repercussions for this? Punishment for them, and they lost their lands. Any native group that supported the Brits were considered the enemy. Chief Mohawk, I think it was Mohawk, or was it Chief Joseph? Chief Joseph, native who settled in that Ohio River Valley, and eventually the Northwest Ordinance allowed the Americans to settle that and allotted the lands for acreage. It was written by Thomas Jefferson. People don't know about that. 1787. Not sure how anyone can forget Tommy J was president. Pirate Slayer. Yep, the Shores of Tripoli. It's part of the U.S. Marine Corps anthem, written by John Philip Sousa, by the way, because of the Barbary Coast War. Yesterday it was Uncle Sam who was answering our questions instead of you. He was fun, but I missed you. Well, that's very sweet of you for us. I missed you too. Remember when Democrats were just recently tearing down statues of Jefferson? Okay, Jeb, you're way too political. It's all politics with you. You never actually focus on the history. You only use the history as a motive to talk about politics and trashing the Democrats. It is true that the Democrats founded the KKK. That doesn't mean that the Democrats today would support the KKK. I certainly don't think that Barack Obama, a proud liberal Democrat and the first black president, would support the KKK. I mean, you have to allow for history to happen, the parties to change, and that to be acceptable. This doesn't mean the parties switch and the Republicans or the Democrats would be Democrats in the 1860s. I don't know about that. But that doesn't mean that the Democratic Party today is the Democratic Party of racism, Jim Crow, and the KKK. And I'd like you to focus on the history. Why don't we focus on the history? Why is it always politics? History should not be used as a cudgel to prove your political point. History should inform your political decisions. Last of the Mohicans, Bones. I don't even know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's true. Oh, you're talking about the movie. Yeah, it's a book, James Fenimore Cooper, who's an American, who's obviously going to make the Brits look bad, writing in the early 19th century. Do you think the Founding Fathers considered the other non-Christian or non-Abrahamic religions when defining freedom of religion? Very, very little. There were plenty of Jews in early America. Washington visited a synagogue. There were some overtones made by Thomas Jefferson to Islam. He had obviously studied it. There was some understanding that there were non-Christian religions that would or could enjoy the labor of those who had sacrificed in order to secure the freedom for freedom of religion. But generally speaking, it's very hard to see the Founding Fathers picturing America as anything but a Judeo-Christian nation. The SPLC is a leftist civil rights organization that funds KKK currently. You may have missed this revelation. I did hear about this. So the Southern Poverty Law Center has done a lot of good work in the past at curbing and pointing out racism, anti-Semitism, transphobia, homophobia, things like that, sexism, and has labeled a lot of organizations, usually on the right, as enemies of progress, freedom, and opportunity. And sometimes it's overkill, and sometimes it's justifiable. It's hard to say that some right-wing think tanks are equivalent to, the KKK. They certainly are not. That's way too much. That's way too politicized. The SPLC has been very politicized for a long time, and now it is recently coming out that they actually are so corrupt that in order to keep their own donations rolling in and keep their own funding, they manufactured not just right-wing white supremacist organizations, infiltrated them and funded them so that they could promote, the garbage of white supremacy. But they basically kept white supremacy in many cases, even the Klan, alive in order to have an enemy so that they could continue to raise funds and get support and cry foul and target their political opponents. It's a horrifically manipulative thing to do. You are actually keeping your enemy alive so that you can gain support against your enemy and get the money and the sympathy and the justification and the political power that you want. It's absolutely abominable. In fact, the Unite the Right rally of 2017 at Charlottesville, which was infamous for the president's comments at the time, is an example. The white supremacists who acted as agitators during the counter protests about taking down the statue of Robert E. Lee were, some of them, either informants or paid for or supported basically the entire white supremacist far-right wing of neo-Nazi wing of that Unite the Right protest was funded and supported in some way, shape, or form by the Southern Poverty Law Center. So they've had informants, they've had agitators of their own. They've also paid for and supported white supremacist organizations doing white supremacist things, like the Unite the Right rally. It should be one of the big scandals. I can't think of another organization in American history that has done this. This would be like the Salvation Army. It's hard. It'd be like the Salvation Army getting people fired on purpose and infiltrating companies so that people can get fired so that they can take care of the homeless and those who are out of jobs and those who are impoverished. It's just crazy. Both American Civil War and Revolution, we have a weaker power trying to get independent from a greater power. But why in one the weaker power is remembered as traitor and not in the other? That's a ridiculously foolish argument. That's the lost cause myth of the South. The Confederates were disobeying and trying to destroy and undermine the created order. The Union is not parallel to the British Empire. That is the lost cause myth in and in its most extreme form. The Union is the Union created by these founding fathers, the United States of America. They chose to leave that and form their own country. This is what Franklin was trying to avoid when he struck through Jefferson's prohibitions against slavery and condemnation of it in the Declaration. They were trying to avoid multiple countries. They were trying to avoid civil war. They were trying to avoid sectional divisions. They didn't want the divided states. These had been states that left and needed to be brought back. That is a totally different thing than a country declaring its independence. Just because one power tends to be stronger doesn't mean that it's the wrong one. The Americans were more powerful than the Imperial Japanese. They were the more moral than the Imperial Japanese. And I know what people are going to say. They're going to immediately run to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These people never talk about Nanjing. They never talk about Bataan. They never talk about the Japanese giving their own children and civilians sharpened spears and wooden stakes to fight American GIs when they invaded the island. They never talk about that. Never. But yes, the United States, despite many mistakes and the horrific cataclysmic uses of 2 nuclear weapons, was, by almost all metrics, the more moral actor, despite being the more powerful one, than the Japanese in the last World War. It really isn't freedom of religion, but rather freedom from religion, no official government religion. It's the freedom from being forced to believe in one religion or be penalized otherwise. It is not the freedom from religion. The freedom from religion is a more of a modernist, atheistic interpretation of it, where people can now, they have applied the freedom of religion that the founders wrote about to basically not believe in any God. And that was totally foreign to the founders. Even the most deistic of them could not believe in a world without a God. They just did not, some of them did not see the world as being particularly run by a God directly. However, even Ben Franklin acknowledges, despite his deistic leanings, that Providence had a role to play in the victory of the American Revolution. He said so as much and insisted that the Constitutional Convention be opened in prayer because of that. Nature's God, Jefferson calls him. The Jeffersonian Bible is a mythologized rendering and translation of Jesus' statements from the New Testament without the miracles, because he didn't believe in miracles. Obviously, these are in some ways children of the Enlightenment, but they are not. The freedom from religion is the French Revolution, not the American Revolution. The American Revolution is extremely religious in many aspects. The French Revolution is not. That is more of a creation of a freedom from religion. The freedom of religion is the ability to choose which religion you would want, and that can be interpreted now as freedom from religion. But you can be any. But basically, in its most simple form, you can be any kind of Christian you want. You don't have to be there's not going to be an established church in America, and we'll talk about that next week. Meant to comprehend within the mantle of its protection the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian, the Mohammedan, the Hindu, and the infidel of every denomination. Yep. What did you think of the Untold History of America documentary series by Oliver Stone? Haven't seen it. Need to watch that. It's still the 250th birthday year, so I can still watch that. Still have to watch Ken Burns. There's a lot to watch. Just July is its birthday month, and this is its 250th birthday year. So there's still a lot of American history to do on this channel and for me to learn about. Is it just because in American independence, U.S. won? That's an extremely cynical approach. America won both the Civil War and the War of Independence. The idea that the victors write the history is partially true in some elements, but the only way you know that is by knowing the history. To know who the victors are, you have to know the history. So knowing and loving history is part of how you know who wrote the history. Did they not tear down the statues of Jefferson, though? Many people, so this brings back to the slave issue. Many people cannot separate Thomas Jefferson's ideology and what he did for America from his personal failings, and that is harder for some because those personal failings are a contradiction and a violation in some ways of the very ideas and principles that he was supposedly espousing. So there is some hypocrisy with Thomas Jefferson and the other founding fathers. But at the same time, hypocrisy, paradox, tension, contradiction is part of human existence. Tearing down the statues of these people, these statues were not erected because they were slave owners. These statues were erected because they were great men, because they changed the world, because they created this country. One thing President Trump said that I agree with was when they tore down statues of Robert E. Lee, he said they'll come for Washington next. And they did. Columbus, Washington, Jefferson, Madison. Frederick Douglass's statue was targeted because of some of his retrograde opinions about women. Frederick Douglass, the black, freed, slave abolitionist, Lincoln's political confidant, one of the most important men in American history, who gave scathing reviews to the United States was very woke by those standards, especially back then, with what to the slave is the 4th of July. An incredible man in so many ways. They're tearing down they're coming for his statues, which guess what that means? If they were to ever erect a statue to me in 150 years, they would want to tear it down. Did you Thomas Jefferson did you know Thomas Jefferson is my favorite U.S. historical character? And I know this is a hot take, but I would say he and Teddy Roosevelt are the two best presidents. That is a hot take. Two great presidents, no doubt. And if nations got hung up on who a war is, messed up ego feeling. Well, yeah. I mean, nobody does this with other civil wars. The British Civil War is Brit fought Brit. Why the American Civil War has to be so ridiculously politically politicized and polarizing? Excuse me. When you have Americans fighting other Americans. And you can't reconcile that with the fact that the Confederates left the Union and created their own country, had their own president, had their own military, their own money. It's absurd. These things should be easy to reconcile, but people can't reconcile it, even people on this channel. I like Jefferson because he was the most progressive liberal in his own time, like Thomas Paine, and he was handsome and charismatic. Also, I know he admired and to a degree was influenced by Cyrus. Yes, the religious toleration, Cyrus cylinder. Jefferson was an extremely learned man and knew a lot about the ancient world and the Persians. Jefferson was progressive by those standards, but is seen by many as a libertarian or a right-wing classical liberal today. Far more of a libertarian than he would be a leftist. I don't know that he might be a Democrat today. I don't know what Thomas Jefferson would be. I don't know what any of these men would be, actually. It'd be very hard for me to guess if they would be conservative or liberal, because the political debate in America is so much different now than it was 250 years ago. It reminds me of CIA being involved in the drug trade, which was true. Yep. That's informants and agitators definitely have been part of it. Let me see. Do you have somewhere I can read about the SPLC claims? I don't have one on. I don't have a source, but it was a breaking story. The FBI is investigating them currently, and the more the information comes out, the worse it is. It turns out one of their writers was acting as an informant, as an agitator, as kind of almost like a spy in one right-wing supremacist group they were supporting, and she was having an affair with its leader. I mean, this is absurdity. These people are supposed to be progressives. They're supposed to be open-minded. You should have no courtship with these people. And yet not only do you have courtship with them, literally, you are funding them so that you can keep making money. That proves to me that you don't care about poverty. You don't care about minorities. You don't care about gay people. You care about power and money. It's a betrayal of everything that you're supposed to stand for. And Thomas Jefferson would have been a Republican today. That's what a lot of people say. I don't know. Again. I'm so sick of God. Well, I'm sorry. If I'm gonna talk about history, I'm gonna talk about as much of it as I possibly can. And people are gonna wonder why I didn't talk about the founding fathers and religion. And obviously some people this is the only thing they think about. The founding fathers were all religious. They were all Christians. America's a Christian nation, God, guns, and glory. And they think about that, but then there's other people who are like, no. Don't you understand? The American Revolution was against religion. No. If I don't address it, there will be people like that who continue with their ignorant views on both sides. There is a better way to understand this. There is nuance in this topic. I have to talk about it only because it is directly connected to the principles, values, and teachings of these men and their revolution. Muhammad Ali's 6-year-old bride, not Muhammad Ali. Muhammad married a 6-year-old, according to Islamic tradition. Did anyone see the other day when Democrats dressed as white supremacists marched in front of the White House? Bro, that was 100 years ago. Let it go. Neither the Constitution nor Bill of Rights says anything to what people are free or not free to do. It gives people freedoms. It establishes that the government that government does not ensure people's freedoms. It only protects it. Well, I don't know what Herzonays are. So, Native Indian murdered land? Yes, the Native Americans lost lots of land. Much of their land was conquered by the Europeans and the Americans. It was awful what happened to the Native Americans. Most of them died off from diseases that were usually unintentionally spread, and the vast majority of Native Americans had also conquered and stolen land from each other and genocided each other. Let's go with the language, because I heard this language, I watched it. Uncle Sam heard this language yesterday. Genocide and theft. By that logic, The Native Americans had genocided and infested each other. I know these are not real words. I'm using them to prove a point because we're now genocided. We can use these words incorrectly. Their own people, other Native Americans, for a long time before the Europeans showed up and enslaved them. When the Cherokee are forced off of their land from the Removal Act in 1830, they take their slaves with them from Georgia. You don't see that in the paintings. You don't hear about it in the sad documentaries with the Native American voice actor doing the narration. They don't want to tell you that. There's no inconvenience in any of that's inconvenient. I'm sorry, history is full of inconveniences. And that's one inconvenient. It's an inconvenient truth, to quote Vice President Gore. These people were not peaceful savages. And the peaceful savages were almost always rancorously taken advantage of by non-peaceful savages. And I'm calling them savages only because that was the narrative that was created in the 19th century. The peaceful savage. There were plenty of peaceful people. You know what happens to peaceful people? They either get almost no land or power, or they get run over. The only reasons the Swiss get away with it is because they have the damn Alps around them. They have the mountains to protect them. They literally have God setting up a barrier to protect them from everybody else. The vast majority of peaceful civilizations don't last long or are not peaceful for very long. It is a total misconception and an insult to history. So the Native Americans, by the logic of people who want to say the Americans, look at what they did. Yes, it was awful. There's no quarter for that. I know, don't excuse it. But to pretend that this isn't what happens during war and conquest in human history is absurdity. And the Native Americans, when they went rancorous, when they went violent, they went really violent. Look at what the Apache and the Comanche did. The Comanche were so violent, the Mexicans kicked them out of their country. It's absolutely true. Let me see. Keep going. Well, Washington's monument is made so we make a statue of his ideas and not individual action. Why do we do it with Jefferson? The Jefferson Memorial? If it has a statue of him in it? They hate on Churchill, too. Churchill was a complex and broken man and did terrible things. Gallipoli, the Bengal famine. These are bad things. Churchill had some really racist views. But he was an incredible leader, he was a brave man, and he stood up to evil. I don't know. Maybe for some people it's not okay to stand up to the Nazis. That's not and to basically stand alone. Because if you think the Soviet Union was sympathetic, you are wrong. I've just been hearing today that Stalin not only signs Molotov-Ribbentrop and divides up Poland with the Nazis, which I already knew, he actually petitioned to join the Axis powers and sent food to the Nazis during the war. Then when he gets invaded, he sheds his skin and comes out as this hero. The man who murdered 20 million people, killed more than Hitler. It's absurd that Churchill, standing up to Nazism alone, for all of his bravery and greatness, and that's what we remember, can't have that. Because he had other views that were wrong. I'm sorry. And this has nothing to do with politics. This is not right-wing or left-wing. This is, in 150 years, we will all be dead, most likely. I don't know how science is going to do. Maybe we'll live a lot longer. And I don't want to be judged for what I was wrong about. I want to be understood in the context in what I lived. In history, we call this the victim of time. And we are all victims of our time. Muhammad is a victim of his time. And the same people who are like, yeah, the founding fathers were great, are often the same ones who are like, Muhammad, look at how horrible he was. He married a 6-year-old girl. I'm also going to now go to church and worship a God who was born of a pregnant 12-year-old. She was most likely 14, at most, the Virgin Mary. A woman who was able to menstruate, which might be as young as 12 in that time period. Sorry, inconvenient truths. History is full of them. Everyone is a victim of their time. Everyone. And people use these as excuses to hate a group. I don't want my statue. I don't want my statue removed theoretically. Meaning, I do not want to be hated for what I got wrong. I want to be understood for what I got wrong. I hope that history. Tsar Peter the Great, when he died, said, "I hope God will forgive me my many sins for the good I have tried to do for my country." And I think Jefferson and Washington would have fought the very same way. And I think all the great men of history have fought, and women have fought the same way. I want to be remembered for what I did right and not what I got wrong, because we all get things wrong, but not everybody does something great. To quote, is it Achilles? Is it Brad Pitt and Troy? And that is why no one will remember you. There's plenty of slave owners that we don't know the names of, but not all of them led the Americans to victory against the British. Not all of them became the first president. Not all of them kept the Americans free, but George Washington did. What country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. Yep, Jefferson could be pretty aggressive. The blood of the tyrants, the tree of liberty is sometimes watered with the blood of tyrants. So, why is John Adams not considered a great president? Didn't he help organize the Continental Army? Again, great founding father has nothing to do with his presidency. The XYZ affair, the Alien Sedition Acts, he was seen as going against the very values he had supposedly fought for his entire life. He is misunderstood. I think he gets too hard of a reputation because he's between Washington and Jefferson. But John Adams held off the Federalists who wanted him to go to war because he believed war was a mistake, and created the American Navy. So there are some accomplishments, but it's not this impressive presidency of a Jefferson or a Washington. And I think because he's such a great founding father, the standard for how we judge him as a president is a lot harsher. I think they were subpoenaed to speak in front of Congress. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah. Let me see. 2020 and campus uprisings before BLM really looked a lot like PRC, CCP, Cultural Revolution, 1969. Is there a parallel? Black Lives Matter has admitted that it is a Marxist and communist-influenced organization. Cultural Marxism, which is obviously the root of a cultural revolution, has been influential on academia in the left in this country for 80 years. And it is basically this idea that all of the apparatuses of a Marxian dialectic of the have versus the have-not can be applied to the black versus the white, the gay versus the straight, the male versus the female, the trans versus the cis. All of that can be applied in different categories to various different groups of people and be used as a way to analyze the way we understand law, the way we understand politics, and the way we understand power. And so you can reinterpret the Marxian doctrines in terms of not just class, but social not just class and social status and economics, but political status, marital status, gender status, racial status. All of those things have a part to play in the way people interact. It's called the Frankfurt School. It's absolutely, I'm not saying it's wrong or right, it's absolutely documented that this is what people believe and teach. And they're allowed to teach that. This is a free country. They should not be, I don't know about suppressing their rights and freedoms. Obviously, this leads to conflict and the advocacy for conflict. But but in a Marxian logic, in their minds, those conflicts already exist. So they're just pointing out an inconvenient truth, which is what I'm doing. Let me see. I'm going to try to catch up to the chat and then wrap up. We went way over. Democrats only care about power. It's why they don't. Okay, why? What's with all the Republicans in my chat today? Go do your own thing. I'm here talking about history. He doesn't have sources. I don't have to have sources. And what I mean by that, and you're going to get all offended, but go look it up. Fact check me. I had one guy, Credential, I don't know if he's here today, but I made some bold claims, and I have before, about Muhammad, about Islamic history, early Islamic history. And he, instead of threatening to kill my family, like some Muslims have done, or other things, immediately went and researched it, and he found out, hey, he's actually right. He obviously is a Muslim who respects his religion. I respect Islam in many, many ways. I brought up some inaccuracies, and by the way, you have no idea if I'm Muslim or not. I've shown a lot of sympathy towards Islam. But just because I may be a Muslim doesn't mean I can't point out historical inaccuracies in my religion. But he went and looked it up, and I encourage everybody to fact check me, and I get fact checked all the time. There's plenty of things I've been wrong about. This Southern Poverty Law Center thing, I don't think I'm wrong about. Is it historical? Not necessarily. It's interesting to me because it shows It shows corruption. It's political. It's geopolitical. All of these things are social sciences. They're related to history. The history would be this organization was founded to prevent and did a great job of preventing uh, white supremacist groups from getting away with it, and now have actually been the reason white supremacist groups have existed in some cases recently. He was definitely wound up because the female informants screwed the leader of one of the groups, which is the standard fare for undercovers. Those masked white supremacists recently marched at the fair in D.C. I didn't even hear about that. Not surprising that they would, trying to get attention. Yeah, it's not that kind of forum. The Discord is a place where I'm more willing to look into things and back them up. But this is my channel. And if you want to challenge my narratives and what I have said, then find the evidence. Look into the story. You're more than allowed to be skeptical. I'm more than willing to allow that. But yeah, you are definitely trying to condone what the Americans did to the Indians. Oh, for Pete's sake. Where did I say it was acceptable? It's not acceptable. You have to accept that it happened, and you have to accept that it is not, that if we're going to call it a genocide and theft, then the natives were genociding and thieving from each other long before they ever saw a white person. What do you think the Americans did, Rick? Yep, exactly. Native American Indian tribes have been slaughtering other Indian tribes for hundreds of years. And there are many great and beautiful and wonderful things about various different Native American groups and tribes. And there are many things to love about them. And I love Native American history. That doesn't mean, and I love British history. I don't gloss over what they did in India. And I sure as heck don't gloss over what the Apache did to the Pueblo and the other Indians in their area, or the Hopi, who were horribly mistreated. They were one of those peaceful groups. They were pacifists. How did that work out for them? The Anasazi. What the natives fought of the Anasazi, the Pueblo, and the different Navajo groups? Spooky stuff. They actually believed that they were demons or angels or aliens. There's rumors about that. There's all sorts of fears and legends of giants and aliens amongst Native Americans, just like there was in ancient Egypt. But the Anasazi were at the very least an extraordinarily violent tribe of natives that were wiped out by other natives because they were so violent. These are real tribes who did real horrible things to one another. And by the way, most of them, the Apache and the Comanche, were treated worse by the Mexicans than they were by the United States. Nobody ever makes that point. In fact, the Mexicans are another group of people that the Americans are constantly told they mistreated. Which is true. Mexicans have been treated horrible in this country, especially in the immigrant side of things. But that doesn't change the fact that the Mexicans themselves treated the natives terrible. Or the French treated the Mexicans terrible, and then the United States, at the end of the Civil War, got rid of the French in Mexico. It's a true story. Benito Juarez. Maximilian I. Fascinating. I did a video on it. One of my favorite topics that nobody talks about. What's racist mean? It means hating somebody because of their physical traits. The Native Americans have no choice but to fight back against the greater power. Okay, tell me the names of the tribes that fought back against the other tribes. How are the Sioux fighting back against the more powerful tribes when they, a nation, come in and kick out the Arapaho, the Pawnee, and the Crow in Wyoming and South Dakota, because that land is now sacred to them? Which they did long before white people, before the Americans show up with Custer. No one says Churchill shouldn't stand up a bit, and how matter when you rush to war and leave your country worse off. When you rush to war and leave your country worse off. I'm sorry, the war had already started before Churchill took power. See, I get this all the time. There are people on the right who hate Winston Churchill. It's just the dumbest thinking possible. Because they have to minimize this certain event that happened during that war to millions of people. They have to minimize it because it's not that important, because they listen to Tucker Carlson. And yet in their attempts to save Western civilization, they undermine one of the most important figures in Western civilization's history. You didn't understood what I said. I mean, if you make a monument that represents the individual, like Washington Monument, that is not a statue. Oh, it's an obelisk, which shows the influence of the ancient and classical art styles and architecture of the Egyptians and Romans and Greeks on the American founding. Most of the buildings in Washington, D.C. are made like that. And obviously an obelisk is a monument to fertility, and Washington being the virile leader of the Americans, put two and two together. Let me see. The British did get rid of Churchill after the war. Clement Attlee took over. Got India its independence. In the last 15 years, current politics have infiltrated history in a way I thought we learned not to after the Cold War. That's true. Oh, by the way, people lived much shorter lives in days of Jesus. Absolutely true. And same for Muhammad's date in time. So you got to be fair here. Harsonet isn't here, but does host ever do formal debates with logic and argumentation? I mod for a debate channel and was just curious. I'm also in a larger debate community. Oh, interesting, Joseph. Yes, we have had debates. You can go watch the James Polk debate I did with my own moderator, and if you become a member, my moderators did a debate. They're set to do another debate on sometime this month for America's 250th about the two economic systems in America, capitalism versus socialism. So yes, we do debates here. This is just back and forth, me answering questions. You are not dumb, Faraz. I did not say that. What I do not like is when you ask about something over and over again and you focusing on only one particular narrative and you're not actually focused on the history. I answered what you said about the obelisk and all of that. And he's interested in religious history, and that's fine. And I answered that stuff. I was murdered at the age of almost 78, if I'm right. Who was? Muhammad was a bad person even with the standards of his own time. At that time in Arabia, they stoned young women in Arabia, but not in Sassanid Persia, nor in China or India. They stoned people in Israel, too, at the time of Jesus. Let me see. The United States had one slogan, Manifest Destiny. That meant from sea to shining sea, ask Pope. That's conquest, yes. That means conquest. That means settlement. That means pioneership. That means expansion. Yes. Now, Rick, please tell me a country in human history that did not expand that way. If it did not gain land by taking it from other people or settle it. In fact, when you look at how other countries expanded, the United States expansion was into lands that were sometimes completely unoccupied because the natives said it was their land but hadn't settled it or cultivated it. Joan of Arc was 19 when they burned the stake. Yep. You lied about the Frederick Douglass statue earlier, by the way. The statue was removed, wasn't taken down because of misogyny issues. By all reports, it was targeted retaliation during the BLM movement. I didn't lie. Okay, so first of all, it's disgusting to accuse someone of lying. It's one of the worst things a human being can do. And I can be mistaken. I don't know if it was misogynistic views. I guess I was wrong about that. But there were actually people who were, I have seen the video footage, who were protesting the statue and wanted to take it down. These were not right-wingers. And two black men dressed as Civil War attire defended the statue. They wanted to take down statues of Frederick Douglass. And regardless of the reason for it, at the end of the day, it's ridiculous to take down statues at all. Now I can understand why you want to take down Confederate statues. They are a conquered nation who you don't want to honor their legacy because they fought to defend slavery. That makes a lot of sense to me. But historical figures need to be remembered for what they did, good and bad, not silenced. Let me see here. Can we talk a little bit about American Revolution, but in terms of identity of America in Britain and individual state identities? I already answered all. I talked about all of this during the live stream lecture for us. That's the problem. You ask questions that I've already answered. You go over things that I've already covered. And then you act upset because you say that I'm going to get upset because you're going to ask something that you've asked a bunch that has a particular narrative behind it, and I'm trying to focus on something else. So I'm not going to talk about identities. Sorry. Like, I understand why the Americans want to leave the British Empire, but it's hard for me to understand why they were leaving British identity. They didn't leave their British identity. In many ways, they believe the British were violating their own identity by becoming tyrannical. Look at how Parliament, you got a bicameral legislature. You have so much from British common law in the American government. It's crazy. Let me see. Yes, I'm allowed to be wrong, but I'm not allowed to lie. Americans came from Britain and Ireland, Little Dutch. Yep, you didn't make any art claims. Okay, this is why I support. Oh, geez. I'm trying to get to the history. Let's see if there's any other questions about history. We went way over, but I want to catch up to the chat before we're done. You don't know jack about the natives. Yes. You don't know jack about the natives, ho, is an extremely good way to fact check me and to prove that I'm wrong and get me to change my mind. I know a lot about the natives, and I know a lot about what they did. And some of them were extraordinary people with extraordinary societies, but they were not peaceful. Not all of them. Some of them were. Some of them were mixed. Some of them were no different than the Europeans they encountered. The Europeans just had the better technology that eventually allowed them to gain the upper hand, that eventually allowed them to destroy their societies. Sorry, that's what happened. If you think Native American history and culture is beautiful, then I suggest to watch a documentary of Matt Walsh on natives. This is the problem. This is the problem. I get tired of people lambasting the United States, unlambasting people, and having no presence of mind to understand that they will also be lambasted one day, and they don't care. Apparently, they're too nihilistic to care, I guess. I say, the Native Americans aren't that peaceful. There's a lot of problems with the Native Americans, and they immediately get you really should just join the right and join Matt Walsh and all this. I'm not into demonizing them. I'm allowed to have a balanced, nuanced perspective about the Native Americans because I have a balanced, nuanced perspective about everybody. That's why I can defend Jesus and Muhammad. That's why I can defend Jefferson and Sitting Bull. That's why I can understand who these people were in their context. I don't have to demonize one society and have to make one society the perpetual villain. I can understand that human societies are made of humans, and humans suffer from the human condition, which is what my entire line of work is about. And the human condition means we do bad things. Let me see. I am a native. Tell us our history. Tell us our history. Tell us our history. I'm sorry. What native tribe do you belong to? Because there were thousands of tribes saying, I'm a Native American. You don't speak for all Native Americans. You don't know about all of our Native Americans. And odds are, if you are part of any particular Native American nation, that nation gained its land by conquering it from another group of natives and enslaving them, and sometimes even eating them. I don't know if your tribe did that, probably not, but some of the tribes did practice cannibalism. They found fecal matter in the remains of Indians from the last 1,000 years. Human remains, human DNA in the fecal matter of dead Indians. Some of them practiced barbaric things. Some of them practiced beautiful and incredible things. And some of them, strangely enough, practiced both. Yes, the French were in Vietnam before the United States. Native Indian outlived the flood of Noah in its Grand Canyon. Christopher, are you drunk? Please don't come to the channel drunk. This gentleman would like to rationalize the wipeout of the American Indian. Rick, you come to the channel all the time. I think you're a friendly neighborhood historian, someone who's liked and subscribed. Yet you constantly antagonize and put words in my mouth that I never said. I never said that there is any justification for the mass murder of any group of people, nor that the Native Americans got what was coming to them. I am saying there were wars. There was conquest. This happened before, during, and after the arrival of the Europeans. The Europeans just did what everybody else did. That's how they got involved in the slave trade. That's how they got involved in the war with the natives. Why would a right-winger hate Churchill? Because the new right, the woke right, the Tucker Carlson right, whatever you want to call it, I've heard many different names for them, they have a particular animus towards a particular group of people. They hate that a little country exists in the middle of the Middle East that has very little to do with their daily lives. And because of that, they think more about it than the prime minister of that country does, because they're more obsessed with it than Benjamin Netanyahu. And because of that, they have to go back and undermine any sort of horrific thing that happened to that group of people, such as the mass extinction that they faced during the Holocaust. And so to undermine that, they have to make it out that Hitler was forced to do that. Don't you understand? They weren't going to do that. They had no genocidal intentions. It's really Churchill's fault. You've been told the wrong story by these people who are trying to make you feel guilty. It's sickening and conspiratorial. What have you built in your life? I built this channel. Your history books aren't anything against our oral tradition. The problem with, there are beautiful oral traditions in Native American lore and African lore. All throughout the world, there's oral traditions. In fact, the Bible started as oral tradition, if you want to look at the Western society. But the truth of the matter is, the problem with your argument is oral traditions can be changed and manipulated just like textbooks, but it's much harder to change written words already established than to change oral tradition. Oral tradition changes over time. How do you know your oral traditions were preserved properly? It's a lot harder to preserve oral traditions than it is to preserve textual writings. You white people. I didn't bring race into it. I don't care if you're native, black, or white. Your argumentation is phony, it's erroneous, it's fallacious, and it's full of ad hominems. You haven't given me any evidence, as I take a sip because my throat is really dry. Yeah, ever heard of telephone? People change things all the time. I've done this activity with students in the past. I have them write down something on a piece of paper and pass it along. And at the end, they read what they wrote. It's the same thing. Then I have them say a statement and play telephone. And it's hard. And people forget. And people change things. Deliberately and mistakenly. Because we're human. And that can happen in written things. It does all the time. But it happens to language and to oral statements too. Nope, don't care. This is the mule from Family Guy. Nope, Kevin Bacon wasn't in Footloose. Nope, you're wrong. Oral tradition is better than written history because I'm a Native American and you're a white man. You brought race into it. You're the racist. I have said multiple times how much respect and love I have for Native American societies. It's you who have condemned me for being white, and you white people who got your history wrong. I'm sorry. Where's the history wrong? Tell me. And why are you speaking for all Native Americans? Are you speaking for, let's say that you're a Navajo, are you speaking for all the tribes that you guys abused? Sorry, maybe you're one of the abused tribes. Why aren't you angry at the Native Americans who mistreated you? Why is it only the Americans and the white man that gets your ire? Maybe you're the racist. Your game is just that, a game. No one owns the land. No one owns land. It's my favorite, not Family Guy, Futurama statement. You can't own property. I can because I'm not a penniless hippie. Yes, of course you can own property. The Native American, this is a very good point you make. The Native Americans, a lot of them, had a very different concept of land ownership than the Europeans. They were far more itinerant, far more communal. So Europeans settling land was, they can share it. But then that settlement turned into colonization. The natives weren't used to that. But the natives had very clear ideas about which tribe owned which land, or which tribe had rights to which land. They weren't always willing to share it with each other. In fact, they were willing to conquer and take it from each other. White people keep trying to own that which owns you. The land owns us. Yes, this is the nature will get you back a narrative that I have heard before. Yes, human beings are subject to nature in many cases. And the Native Americans in many cases were far more in touch with an understanding of nature than white people. Mainly because they understood and had advantages because they understood the landscape and terrain much better than the Europeans had. They'd had much more exposure for thousands of years that the Europeans certainly didn't have, and the Europeans were stupid for not listening to them on many occasions. I agree with that. But at the same time, that doesn't make it that the Native Americans were all in harmony with nature. Slash and burn agriculture was extremely common. They hadn't built cities yet. They didn't have developed language. They hadn't cultivated the land in ways that the Europeans had. The planet owns you. Well, then it owns you too. So one group of people on the planet do one thing, then another group on the planet does another thing, and who really cares at the end of the day if it's really just the planet? They arrested the people and found it was drunk vandals on the night of the 4th and not a planned retaliation. Only read first part of the AI told you. Oh, thank you, Moped, for that. But even so, that would not have happened. That tearing down of the Frederick Douglass statue as a prank would not have happened if that wasn't an issue with tearing down statues anyways. Let me see. Mythology guy. Well, that's religion. Eye for an eye, we all blind. That's true. Excuse me. The white people never understood that. And a lot of Native Americans never understood that because they did exactly what the white man did to you, except they didn't bring a bunch of diseases. They took down a mustache man's statue in Germany. That's a good one to take down. I can agree with that. You are nothing without land. And the cultivation of that land is because of who? Who is the one who uses the land? Let me see. Yes, well, the Spanish were white, Austin. The thing I keep hearing over and over is that might make right. I never said that. You are deliberately misinterpreting me. I never said might makes right. I never said it was morally justifiable. I am saying that this is unfortunately how human beings are. They can do it on small scales, they can do it on mass scales. Let me see. The British were betraying the British identity and Americans were resisting the betrayal of British identity. That's what I would say the revolution is, at least from an American perspective. Let me see. I'm going to finally catch up to the chat. Rage is mad because people are losing the connection and it's still getting worse. Well, at least it's not the connection to this live stream. For once, our Wi-Fi is fine. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe taking scalps is part of nature? Is that the planet owning us when natives would scalp whites and other natives, by the way? The idea that it's always this idea that the natives were just mean to the whites and the whites were just mean to the natives first. No, the natives were doing this to each other. And whites oftentimes helped other natives fight and kill off the natives. If you don't believe me, look at the story of Cortez and how he destroyed the Aztecs, because he couldn't have done it with all of the Spanish soldiers. I hear you saying that it's human nature to do bad things, so we might as well do bad things. Yes. I guess you weren't here for the live stream lecture. Human nature is to only do bad things. Let me see. And thank you, Moped. This chat makes me worry for our future. It's just, people do not care. They shove their fingers into their ear and they refuse to listen. They go over things nonsensically. I'm going to not let them bring me to hell where there is no logic with, I'm going to skip ahead. Let me see. When they pushed back against Soder, how sent vigilantes to attack their system? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, the Paiute. Yeah, the Mayadu. Yep. Yeah, it's pretty horrible what happened to the Mayadu, the Paiutes. Tanev, never. You've been here multiple times. You brought this up about water. I think you just like staring at my lips. Cannibalism was extremely rare among the Native American tribes. That's not true. It's rare proportionally to the large number of them, but not proportionally to other groups of people in other areas of the world. What, you think that Saladin and his men ate their enemies? Do you think that the English, after the Battle of Agincourt, sat down to some roasted Frenchmen? The Chinese don't do it. Why do people argue history like it's politics? Because they have a political narrative. Because they're political in their narrative. They're not historical. You don't like Tucker Carlson, you don't like Matt Walsh, and you don't like Shapiro, and who do you like? I understand about Tucker, but why the other two? I'm not going to share who I like and dislike. I listen to a bunch of different sources on both sides of the aisle. I've complimented the people on the right, I've complimented people on the left. Oh yeah, I do love my Tucker impression. Since you remember, I'll do it again. Well, it's obvious. Everybody knows it, and if they don't know it, they're lying to you. I mean, like, everybody knows this. Like, it's obvious Churchill's the villain of the war. I mean, like, so many people are just trying to lie to you about him being a hero. And by the way, I don't necessarily like him, but that doesn't mean I don't listen to him or learn from him. It is my job to listen to and learn from as many people as possible. Your Bible. Dude, your Bible floated here on a boat like y'all. Isn't that the Moses story from the Bible, first of all? But more importantly, my Bible? I wrote a Bible? I didn't know I wrote a Bible. I didn't know I had a Bible. I haven't defended a Bible. You talked to your elders? Oh, well, they must have been those poor elders. I feel bad for them. Let me see. And what they told me passed down in our tribe from generations handed down. Yes. And nobody ever changed anything? Nobody ever did anything wrong? This man is smarter than everyone else in here. Stop with the nasty messages. It's okay. They're exposing what they are, and I'm exposing what I am. Let me see. I speak for my tribe because my elders told me that what's good. You haven't even said the name of your tribe. And if you say Apache, I'm just going to start laughing because I'm sorry, but the Apache, really? The most violent of all native tribes? No one is native. I agree with Austin there. No one is native. Your books will tell you all I need to know, huh? I wouldn't have a YouTube channel if books had all the information in the world. Who really cares? It's just a planet. What kind of statement is that? What I mean is that the planet and nature are important, but it's a planet doesn't have much meaning in interpreting and understanding it without the humans who live there. Obviously, humans are, through their own efforts, the highest, most developed of all creatures and ecosystems on that planet. So, of course, it's a planet. I'm saying that you're nothing without the planet. Well, the planet isn't much without us. Yep. Many of their rival native tribes helped the U.S. Army against them. Yeah, they were so sick of them. I love stories like that because it just tears this narrative apart. You cannot overpopulate. Overpopulation leads to depletion. Natives live in harmony with the earth. Underpopulation also hurts, by the way, because then you don't have enough people to continue your race. Especially if you're dying off at a horrible rate because of European diseases. Netherlands might be, not all. Yes, not all men. I remember this when I was in college. I'm going back to the 1 in 4 women stats when I did Title IX training. Oh my gosh, you're bringing back so many memories. It don't matter, dude. The white people came over and messed it all up. Yeah. Cities, civilization, going to the moon, that all sucks. You know what really is awesome? Scalping people. I'm sorry. If you're going to be nasty and vitriolic, I'm going to give you a little bit of the medicine back. The Native Americans had many beautiful and wonderful things about them. They didn't go to the moon. They didn't develop a civilization that was capable of going to the moon. The United States did. Lee Ferguson got the hint. No, the Vikings got the hint when the natives murdered them, which is the most likely result of what happened to them. In the comic 300, it said the Persian army was cannibals. Probably not true. Yeah, I understand, Faraz. I'm trying to be patient. We're never cannibals. We came from the land, not the site. We came from the primordial ooze deep in the earth. I know my people's origin, unlike y'all. You know what? I figured it out. You're 11. The Friendly Religion Bible. Yes, the Friendly Religion Bible. First commandment. Thou shalt not tear down statues, except if they're of Hitler. Tear those down. Did you get what I said about obelisk? I was trying to say that if it makes something like that for Jefferson Churchill, it would be a good idea. Sure, I guess. I'm going to catch up to the chat and then wrap this up. Not all natives were beaten by Western expansion, but your history books want you to believe otherwise. No, many natives died off from diseases or were beaten off by other natives. Yes, that is true. If you'd listened to me, you would have known that. The moon landing is being criticized like never before. The moon landing is said to be made in a Hollywood basement. Wait, hold on. So you're telling me the oral tradition that's actually got documentable proof, unlike all Native American traditions, the tradition might be a lie or manipulated or not true at all? So you're saying that a tradition that a culture creates can be manipulated and lied about and can be made to manipulate, lie, and misinform people. So you're saying that an oral tradition, a written tradition, a friggin' recorded tradition could be a lie? Why do you do presentism when it comes to the Aztec religion? I don't know. I don't, because cannibalism isn't good 500 years ago, and human sacrifice isn't good 500 years ago. Like, it was obvious to the other natives that it was wrong. Your people are saying the moon never happened. That's nice, but that means that oral traditions, traditional stories, can be lies. Even ones with documentable proof. Unlike the oral traditions of whatever tribe you're from that you won't say the name of. Because I really seriously doubt you're Native American. I'm sorry. I'm starting to seriously doubt that. You might be, and I'm sure your tribe has an incredible and amazing history, because there's a lot of great history with the Native Americans. But cultivation of the land, accomplishments like landing on the moon, those are not strong points in Native American societies. We never went to the moon, but y'all did, and we have all heard the conspiracy. That's nice. I don't care about it. That's nice. You have to believe in conspiracies to undermine it. That's nice. I don't have to believe in any conspiracies. This is for making it all the way through the chat today with these clueless trolls that had no interest in history. Well, it gave me the chance to talk about and share a lot of history. We've even gone longer on the Q&A than we did with the live stream lecture. So that has happened once in a while with these things. But you know what? I've enjoyed it. It's a great way to celebrate America's history. And we've talked mainly about American history. Unlike your government, we speak in truth. No, unlike the American government, you speak in oral traditions that you have no idea are true or not because you have no evidence of them happening. You have no written record of them happening. Most Native Americans did not have a developed language. This is not to say that they were inferior and they deserved and got what was coming to them. That is not what I am saying. What happened to the Native Americans at the hands of whites, Europeans, and Americans is absolutely awful. And Americans should feel bad about it and learn from it. But that doesn't mean that the Native Americans are clean, squeaky figures that we would all be better off with if we acted like them. That isn't true either. Yeah, he's totally not Native American. Keep the lie up, homie. I don't know many Native Americans who call other people homie. You floated here on a boat with the rest of the heretics. I didn't float anywhere. I'm not responsible for any of this. What did I do? And CSR, thank you for the Moped, thank you for becoming a membership. Please become a member. You forgot the hands of Native Americans. And a lot of Native Americans probably came here on boats, by the way, or crossed the Bering Land Bridge. Some of them did. Some of them came from Polynesia. So they came on boats too. Nobody's native to anywhere. Everybody's migrated somewhere. Just human nature. So, yeah, he's a rage baiter master level in his mind. Well, I mean, everybody wins. I get to flatten the argument, he gets to rage bait, and you get to learn about history. Oh yeah, he's a master debater, like Cartman. Americans shouldn't feel bad about it. All nations conquer people to get where they are. And that, my friends, is the best comment of the day. That's the winning comment. We are all people conquered everywhere. Americans did it too. And the more the more this government wants you to believe some BS. I'm still waiting for the evidence of the oral traditions, you to name the Native American tribe, or to fact check anything I just told you. Or Rick Young to help you out, because he was trying to help you for some reason, even though he's supposed to be a friendly neighborhood historian. Freedom is an illusion. Oh, boys. Ute. Okay, you're a Ute tribe. Okay, interesting. I don't know much about the Utes, other than, of course, Utah is named after them, and they were driven out mainly by the Mormons. If I had to guess, from what I have heard, not the most peaceful of tribes. So, fascinating. It's funny, if you had just come onto the channel at the beginning and said, I'm a Ute tribe, and I just want to say I don't like the way you're talking about the Native Americans, and here's why, and here's some fact-checking about how the Native Americans do, what the Native Americans are, that'd be great, but you showed up probably either drunk, high, or both, and then insisted on rage baiting, so I have very little respect for the way you handle yourself. No disrespect. Tell your elders that if they have to talk to you, I feel sorry for them, and I respect them. I need you back in class. Why? Is the teacher passed out and they need a real teacher? There's no genetic evidence that Native Americans or any of them came from Polynesia. Siberia, Asia, migrations over centuries. There's probably some truth about it. It is also true the Native Americans went to Polynesia in. Huh? Where's your people from? I don't know. The United States? That's where my people are from. My people crossed seas and oceans to settle this land against cataclysmic odds. They built up a giant civilization that was the most prosperous and beneficial and humanitarian in human history. That's my oral tradition as an American. So, why is John Hancock not the first U.S. president? He is technically. He's the president of the Continental Congress, but he wasn't the president of the United States. He didn't want to be president. He wasn't big in the running of the Constitutional Convention, and he died young. 1791, I think. So, anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this. Russian, I like the guesses. Keep guessing, yeah, you fact-checked everything except your fact-checks, other than the Polynesian thing, maybe, didn't work. They fell apart completely. You came from somewhere, dude. Yes, and everybody came from somewhere. Everybody came from somewhere. And I'm going to go somewhere now, and that's to bed. Because you guys wore me out. Read a story of a group of people on the planet they have conquered and been conquered. Yep. People are too short-sighted to believe that. Northwest Coast peoples, people and co-deserted of Japanese fishermen from pre-Columbian. Interesting. Thank you, Felina. See, that's fact-checking. And that's not even fact-checking. History has always been messy. Not even when the USA, but in my opinion, America is hands down the best result of a nation built in human history. And that included savage, horrible things done by the Americans. Absolutely. You're not man enough. Well, at least I am a man, Caprello. I don't know what you are, but a man is something that you are not, because men have the willingness to stand up for what they believe in and do not hide behind insults. So, I'm not, yeah. Except RX, I respectively mentioned multiple times how much I love Native Americans. So, sorry, Andy, you're going to have to watch it. It'll be up. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your 4th of July weekend. Happy birthday to America. And the United States, by the way. And because America is 2 continents. But I hope you all have a great week ahead. We'll be back at our normal time, Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Check out all the long, short, and live-form content available 24/7, 365 days a year. I don't know if a long-form video is coming out tomorrow. I did 2 already this weekend. You can go watch me read the Declaration of Independence in your own time, excuse me. And next weekend we'll also have our members-only Q&A. That's an extra hour of Q&A with members only. So, Moped, you are now entitled to that, as is Jason, and they also have the emojis because they're members. So, all right, take care. I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. And in the words of Billie Eilish, oh wait, that's Sabrina Carpenter who sings Espresso. Yeah, birds of a feather flock together. Okay. I hope you all take care and have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you again next time.